When I was at work, at the end of the day, my coworker invited me to dinner at her place. She lives alone. I refused and said I have something urgent to do. You might judge me and call me an idiot, but you don't understand. I've been playing this every single day for 10 years. Since I was younger, I was the best player. No game was good enough. Then they showed me a beta test game to play. This was the hardest and best game of my life. But now, 10 years later, when I finished the final stage, my life was empty again. Then something weird, I got sucked into the screen and fell asleep. When I opened my eyes, I saw a different room, and this guy, this old man, I remember him, but I don't know him. He called me Calix Szczecin, the son of the dead count. He also said he gave me a supreme healing potion so I will survive, but I need to endure the pain until I'm fully healed. I faked having no memory and asked his name. The man's name is Russell. He is acting as the new leader of the family until the new heir is ready to take the throne. When he left the room, I went to the mirror and was sure this was not my body. And look at this face. I was never this handsome. Blonde, green eyes, and young. Would it be weird to fall in love with myself? Am I gay for this? Then suddenly, a system window appeared in front of me. It was just like the game I spent 10 years trying to beat. I can see all my information on it. I accidentally touched my chest and fell to the floor in pain. This was the wound that almost killed this body, or maybe it did kill it, since I own it now. Who could have stabbed him with a knife right there? While I was thinking about the possibilities, someone knocked on the door. Now I need to pretend to be the real owner of this body or I'll be busted. The girl was a maid in the house and brought medicine. I took a good look at her stats. Can I use her? I need to know her name to figure that out. The girl then asked what was wrong with me. Afraid of being caught for not remembering her name, I tried to look directly at the system window. The girl's name is Lila, and she is 23 years old. But I quickly noticed something weird. It says, here she serves a different family than mine, and she has a high level of combat skills. And then I knew, this girl, she was sent to kill. This medicine is actually poison, and those melons are just to distract me from the danger. When I refused to take it, she insisted even more. With no choice, I faked drinking it and dropped the medicine on the floor. Then the girl changed her look and moved so fast it was insane. She grabbed the medicine cup, said nothing spilled, and I should drink it. My body froze with fear. This girl is not normal. If she's an assassin, me refusing to drink might make her kill me and run away. So I pretended to pass out. After all, I am sick from a wound. The girl was too fast. She held me and said the orders were to make him drink. Her cold eyes leave no doubt. She's going to eliminate me if I don't do it myself. So I drank the medicine. Right after that, I yelled to call Russell. It was an urgent matter. When she left, my body was numb. I tried to throw up, but it wasn't enough. When I fell to the floor, I saw a hidden pot. I don't know why it's here, so I looked and it was rotten milk. When I drank it, I puked so much that I passed out. It was only when I opened my eyes that I was sure I didn't die. Russell was furious about it. I was sleeping on the floor and made all this mess. I didn't want to talk. I was still so scared of dying back there. But I need to focus on surviving. And to do that, I need to do something. Looking at the system window that only I can see, Russell's stats were absurd. This guy is honest, just like I thought, and has insane combat power. I can trust him. So I told him everything about the maid and getting poisoned as my only way to survive. He listened to this and didn't doubt me, but he also stated he needs proof. Because with no witnesses, me claiming that the second wife's family sent someone to eliminate me is serious. The maid Lila is here as a helper from the second family, since the first family is struggling financially. The old man didn't doubt me, but he doesn't act without certainty, so I made a request and said it in a way he would not refuse. 4 hours later, under the mantle of night, Lila moved like a shadow through the grounds of Shaken Castle. Disguised, she noticed the security had been reinforced, but her expertise soon revealed an opening. Slipping inside undetected, she was surprised to find the corridor leading to Calix's quarters completely unguarded. Entering the room, she found her target on the bed, motionless, just as she had planned. He must not have felt a thing, she thought, satisfied with the effectiveness of her special poison. Lila placed a letter on the desk, and with a swift movement, used Calix's personal seal to authenticate the forged document. Mission accomplished. All that was left was to disappear into the darkness. However, as she turned to leave, a cold blade pressed against her throat. Cornered, Lila tried to bargain for her life. "The young master is already dead. There's nothing you can do, Russell. Let me go. The Shekin clan will now belong to the only available heir, young Master Grambine." Russell showed no sign of being swayed by her arguments. Lila insisted, reminding him of his oath of loyalty to the Shekin clan, not to a single lord. It was then that Calix spoke up, surprising the assassin by revealing he was still alive. "A slow death is quite dramatic, don't you think?" he commented with an unsettling calm. "Poisoning is a common method in disputes among noble families, I know, but you were careless. Do you have any idea how problematic it is for an assassin to be discovered?" In an act of desperation, Lila drew a hidden dagger and broke free from Russell's grasp, lunging directly at Calyx. However, her attempt failed miserably. Russell intercepted her with overwhelming speed, incapacitating her with a precise blow that left her stunned. Calyx watched the scene, reflecting. He knew the theory about the three-class power difference, but witnessing the overwhelming disparity between Russell and Lila in person was another matter entirely. Turning to the subdued assassin, he continued, "No fool would leave behind evidence or witnesses to a poisoning. The punishment for attempting on the life of a noble is execution. Even if you are a noble yourself, you won't escape. Now I have everything I need. The proof you requested, Russell, and a witness to the crime." Faced with the irrefutable truth, Lila lost consciousness and collapsed. The reaction surprised Calyx, but Russell confirmed that she had indeed fainted. Then, the knight activated a skill, and Calyx realized he was probing the assassin's mana core to determine her class. "She hasn't mastered any mana-breathing techniques," Russell reported. "She's only at the level of an elite soldier. Mana-restraining cuffs won't be necessary to contain her." Observing the prince's calm expression, Russell wondered. When he had accepted Calyx's request, he had doubted something like this could actually happen. Now, he had the impression that the young master already knew what was to come, though he had no idea how. Pushing those thoughts aside, Calyx gave the order. "Tie her up for interrogation. There are many things to be clarified." A short time later, Lila was tied to a chair. While she remained unconscious, Calyx applied a potion to her wound. Gradually, the assassin began to stir. As she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was the face of Calyx Sheikhan, and the realization of her utter vulnerability hit her with full force. After 6 hours, the victim's breathing gradually slows until it stops completely. Calyx began, his voice cold and analytical. "It's a rather popular poison, as it guarantees a peaceful and painless death. Considering my history of attempts on my own life, everyone would have assumed I took it myself. It would have been the perfect plan. If it had worked, you would have been more effective if you'd used a fast-acting poison, and if you were willing to die for the mission. Why didn't you see it through to the end?" "What do you mean by that?" Lila asked, confused. "You didn't want to die," Calyx stated flatly. "That proves your loyalty isn't strong enough to give your life on Countess Stella's orders." He then turned to his knight. "Russell, use something to make her reveal what she knows." "What are you going to do?" she asked desperately. Calyx drew closer, displaying a small pill on his palm. "Do you know what this is?" Before she could answer, Russell forced her mouth open. Calyx inserted the pill, then poured in some goat's milk to wash it down. "Make her swallow." Lila struggled, but she couldn't resist. The pill slid down her throat. Lila panicked, demanding to know what she had just swallowed. With an icy calm, Calyx revealed that since she had tried to poison him, he was simply returning the favor. "What kind of poison did you use?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's called Sidis's marionette," the prince replied. The revelation left her stunned. "How could a spoiled brat like you get your hands on something so powerful?" Lila demanded in disbelief. Calyx smirked, explaining that the right amount of money can buy anything, including the main ingredient, white radish. The mention of the item surprised even Russell. However, the only reaction Calyx cared about was the one from the girl before him. "How do you know so much about it?" she insisted. In a world without the internet, he thought, just knowing the right terms already gave him an overwhelming advantage over any opponent. "I'll let you go," he declared. "Just tell your master the mission was a success." Lila challenged him. "And why should I obey you?" "Because you want to live," Calyx replied, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial tone. "The poison I used has over 3,000 antidotes depending on the formula, and the only formula that can save you, only I possess." He stared at her, letting the threat hang in the air. "So, if you don't want to risk your one and only life, you will obey me without question. What's it going to be?" Defeated, Lila gave in. "I'll obey. Now untie me." Calyx shook his head. "That's not how you ask for a favor." The girl's aggressive posture instantly crumbled, replaced by an embarrassed submission as she began to beg to be released. The drastic change aroused Russell's suspicion, who wondered if she might be plotting something. However, Calyx realized the true cause of her sudden urgency. The spoiled goat's milk was finally taking effect. "Russell, release her," the prince ordered. "Are you sure, young master?" the administrator questioned. "Lila is an important witness," Calyx stated. "I want to preserve her dignity at least." Russell didn't understand, but the prince insisted, "Just untie her already. I don't want her to relieve herself right here." As soon as she was untied, Lila ran to the nearest place that could serve as a latrine. Sometime later she returned and, with her gaze lowered, assured the prince she would go back to her master and report the mission's success. Watching her leave, Calyx reflected that to deceive whoever was behind her, he would need someone with the authority to mobilize the knights. And that person was, without a doubt, Russell. The administrator approached, curiosity written all over his face. "Young master, how did you acquire so much knowledge?" Calyx tested the waters. "Would you believe me if I said I learned it all from a book?" Russell was skeptical. If someone published a book like that, they wouldn't keep their head on their shoulders for long. Besides, a forbidden tome would never be found in this castle. Seeing that the simple lie wouldn't work, Calyx changed tactics. "Do you remember the dagger that pierced my chest?" "I do. But why mention it now?" Russell asked. "That dagger is a relic from my mother," Calyx explained. "They say it possesses a mystical power that was apparently released into me when it came into contact with my body." Russell's expression was still one of doubt. Calyx realized he needed to go further. "To unravel the dagger's secret, I had to pierce my own heart with it." "If that's true," the administrator pondered, "such an incredible treasure should be famous, yet I've never heard of it." "Have you ever heard of the dagger of Kreia?" Calyx retorted. Russell's eyes widened. "Yes, the dagger your mother left. Is it the dagger of Kreia? If that's the case, we're talking about the greatest of all treasures. That makes sense." Finally, Calyx thought. He had been convincing. "Have you told this secret to anyone else, my lord?" Russell asked, his voice low. "No, only you know," Calyx assured him, changing the subject. "Putting that aside, what is your opinion on Lila's testimony? She said that all of my father Shikin's movements were leaked. The official story was that a knight, on the verge of reaching the 7th class, was killed in a monster attack along with his entire escort." "I don't believe that version," Calyx declared. Russell remained in a calculated silence. As a soldier, it wasn't his place to get involved in politics, but he admitted to himself that Shaken's death raised legitimate doubts. Without proof, however, only suspicions remained. "What was the real reason for my father's death?" Calyx pressed, his gaze hardening. "If it was murder, I want to know who's behind it, because as soon as I find out, I intend to get my revenge." Calyx claims the Kosala family might be behind his father's murder, also suspecting the Countess and her son. He warns Russell that if Grambine takes the position, his entire plan for revenge will be ruined. Therefore, he insists that the knight not give up, even if the situation seems unfavorable, because being loyal to a family that plotted a murder does not befit the honor of a true knight. Moved by these words, Russell swears loyalty to Calyx Shikin, admitting that in doing so, he is abandoning the beliefs he has defended for nearly 60 years. The young master is satisfied. After all, he now had the support of a 6th-class warrior, the most powerful man in the entire county. With that, Calyx finally placed the reins of his revenge in the hands of the tiger, who had always walked his own path. In a gesture of humility, Calyx states that it is an honor to have the loyalty of such a skilled swordsman, but that he does not feel worthy. Russell, however, assures his new master not to worry, as he will help him become a strong man. Changing the subject, Calyx points out that the Countess used poison treacherously, but left behind evidence and witnesses. He believes this is enough to begin his retaliation and dismantle the enemy faction. Russell agrees and asks what he can do to help. That was all Calyx needed to hear to put his plan into action. Elsewhere, a meeting was underway. Seated at the head of the table, the Countess declares that all who were summoned are now present. Murmurs ripple through the hall. Many wonder why she is occupying the Count's throne, while the knights have remained on alert all night, fueling the circulating rumors. The Countess confirms that the rumors are true, announcing that during the night the young master Calyx Shaken attempted to poison himself, seeking a slow death. One of those present questioned if, for such an act, a notorious poison would not have been used. If the information were true, it would be prudent to assume he would not survive. With Calyx's imminent demise, the clan would fracture, and some were already beginning to consider alliances with other families. This was exactly what the Countess desired, to have Calyx Shiken out of her way. With the succession clearly defined, her son would take power, and she would become the regent. Meanwhile, Calyx asked Russell if everything was ready. The knight replied that he would follow his master to hell if necessary, determined to aid him in his revenge. Back at the meeting, the Countess prepared to announce her son as the new ruler, but her plans were abruptly interrupted. Calyx Shaken strode into the hall through the front doors to everyone's surprise. The Countess was incredulous at his survival. Even so, the young master advanced, making her doubt her own eyes. Around them, everyone wondered how this could be possible. Calyx approached the Countess and declared that the seat she occupied was not appropriate for a woman of her station. Maintaining her composure, she asked how he was feeling. "As it happens, I ingested a poison, but I survived after expelling it immediately," he replied, his tone cutting. "The person who tried to poison me was rather hasty." "Are you accusing me?" she inquired, her voice icy. "I understand you do not recognize me as your mother, but to be accused of attempting to take your life is something I cannot tolerate. We are in the sacred hall a public space where everyone must take responsibility for their words. Calyx smiled. You won't be so confident when the truth comes to light. The Countess wondered what he could possibly know to act with such certainty. Realizing the time had come, Calyx ordered the prisoner to be brought in and declared that everyone deserved to hear what the witness had to say. Many in the room did not recognize the woman, but the Countess knew Lila very well. Tell everyone present your name, Calyx ordered. Lila then formally introduced herself, and the fury on the Countess's face became uncontrollable. Before everyone, Lila revealed her true identity, an elite agent of the Shadow Corps Special Operations Unit, in the service of the Kusala family. She explained that the organization recruits orphans with an aptitude for combat, subjecting them to brutal training at the Gorda Highlands camp. Only the most exceptional survive to be selected and sent on secret missions, operating under false identities in various locations. Her mission, she confessed, was to infiltrate the mansion as Countess Stella's personal maid. Calyx interrupted her, questioning if the Countess was aware of her real affiliation. Lila confirmed without hesitation that she was. The accusation provoked an immediate and furious denial from Countess Stella, who claimed it was impossible that Lila had served in the mansion for 5 years as a spy. She then accused the prince of orchestrating a conspiracy to frame her, insisting that the Kusala family were her allies and would never betray her. She concluded by saying that there was not a single witness who could corroborate this story. The silence was broken when one of the nobles present gestured toward a quiet figure. What about Sir Russell? Why has he remained silent since he arrived? All eyes turned to Russell, who finally spoke, his voice firm and clear. This woman is no mere maid. She is a criminal, caught in the act. I can confirm every word of her testimony, as I personally witnessed her attempt to assassinate Prince Calyx Shekin. He warned those present that they should hear the full account before forming any hasty judgments. A murmur of agreement ran through the hall, and Lila continued. Her primary mission was espionage, reporting her findings to the Countess once a month. When questioned by Calyx, Lila detailed that her reports included the Chief Treasurer's financial records, the late Count Colin's schedule and travel routes, and the political movements within the inner circle of vassals. However, there was a second, more sinister mission. She had been ordered to trick Prince Calyx into ingesting a slow-acting poison. Afterward, she was to invade his chambers, plant a fake farewell letter, and stage his suicide. Lila confessed that she had succeeded in poisoning the prince, but as she attempted to complete the ruse, she was intercepted by Russell and had been held captive ever since. Blinded by fury, the Countess lunged toward Lila, screaming that she had no proof. If it's proof you desire, Countess, then proof you shall have. Calyx's voice was glacial as he signaled to Russell. Russell stepped forward, revealing the farewell letter Lila had forged. I captured the assassin red-handed last night in the prince's chambers. But he didn't stop there. In his other hand, he held up the Scroll of Earth's Memory, a magical artifact known to many present. Russell explained that the scroll had the power to reveal the malicious intentions of anyone who touched it, manifesting them as visions. This magic will show us who gave the orders to Lila. The truth will be exposed for all to see. Upon hearing this, one of the older nobles turned pale. A dark thought formed in his mind. The truth could not be revealed, even if it meant silencing everyone in the room. Calyx, ever watchful, noticed the man's sudden discomfort, and with a swift command, ordered the cavalry to enter. Immediately, the hall doors swung open, and armed soldiers marched in, surrounding the guests and blocking every escape route. Cries of protest arose, but they were useless. The knights answered only to the prince's command. The same unsettled noble turned to Russell. What is the meaning of this? I have already consulted the scroll's contents, and I must confess I was shocked by what I discovered, Russell replied gravely. To avoid the chaos that would certainly follow, I took the liberty of summoning the knights, bringing armed soldiers into the main hall. This is an attempted coup, the old man accused. Beside the Countess, a tearful young Grambine asked his mother what they would do. The Countess, for her part, understood the gravity of the situation. The cavalry's support meant that Calyx truly possessed irrefutable proof against her. There was nowhere left to run. To deepen her despair, Calyx mentioned that there was a specific punishment for nobles who attempt to take the lives of their own family. In such cases, the penalty is the gallows, Russell added bluntly. In a desperate act, Countess Stella confessed, taking all the blame. It was me. My son had nothing to do with this. I acted alone. She pleaded for them to spare Grambine's life. Calyx, however, turned to the spy. Lila, what do you have to say about that? The girl didn't hesitate. The day I received my mission, the Countess's son was present. Therefore, he is also part of the conspiracy. Stella's desperation intensified, and she screamed that it was all a lie. Calyx knew she was lying, but he didn't care. To him, the cowards who tried to take his life must pay the price one way or another. mother. The fox hunt had begun. The Countess would finally get what she deserved, and Calyx, victorious, would have his revenge. Calyx had the Countess in the palm of his hand, and she knew exactly what her fate would be. Yet, amidst the tension, Grambine intervened. Ignoring his mother's orders to stay quiet, the young prince advanced toward Calyx and knelt. The gesture left everyone present stunned. Grambine declared that he didn't care about his own fate, but pleaded for his half-brother to spare his mother's life. The Countess herself, surprised by her son's actions, ordered him to return to his place and not to interfere. Among the nobles present, the act was considered an overreaction. While they understood his desire to protect his mother, a prince's bearing should prevail over filial desperation. Kneeling in such a manner was an unacceptable breach of decorum. Calyx, for his part, realized the situation had been drastically reversed. With that single act of submission, Grambine was painting him as the villain. He wondered for a moment if this had all been planned. Either way, he decided to play along. He declared he would grant his brother's wish, stating that those who admit their crimes deserve a reduced sentence. With that, he proposed a deal. If Grambine confessed his sins, Calyx would suggest to the acting regent that the Countess's life be spared. However, he warned gravely that nothing said could be taken back, and that Grambine should weigh his next words carefully. "What are you doing?" Stella demanded, desperate. "Stop this! Don't fall for Calyx's trap!" The Countess's audacity, daring to speak out even in her position, shocked some of the nobles. One of them, an elderly lord, thought to himself that the tide had been turning in their favor, but now Stella herself was saying needless things. Not missing the chance to insult the prince, she continued, until Russell ordered the soldiers to silence her. Grambine watched helplessly as his mother was restrained. With the interruption dealt with, Calyx could proceed. He then asked directly if Grambine admitted that he and his mother had tried to poison him. Reluctantly, the young prince confirmed. Calyx had expected this. He knew the boy had no choice but to appeal to the sympathy of those present in an attempt to save himself. Despite his youth, Grambine was clever enough to have orchestrated this whole charade. Since the confession was given voluntarily, Calyx declared he would keep the scroll of Earth's memory a secret, proof that could otherwise tarnish the family's honor. Furthermore, he agreed to lighten the young man's sentence. "And as proof that you will not contest this decision," Calyx continued, "I order you to seal your own mana core." In the kingdom of Roke, the land of knights, society was rigidly divided among nobles, knights, commoners, and slaves. The only way to ascend to the ruling class was by using mana to strengthen the body. For this reason, the sealing of one's mana core was considered a social death. This was not part of Grambine's plan, and he hesitated, unsure of what to do. He knew, however, that if he refused, his mother's crime would be exposed, and she would be sentenced to the gallows. Her punishment had to be avoided at all costs. Stella tried to dissuade him, aware of the devastating consequences for a noble who relinquished his power, but her pleas were in vain. "Keep your word," Grambine said to Calyx. Then, Russell ordered the scroll to be brought. Before everyone, including his mother who was still trying to stop him, Grambine used the artifact to seal his power. The procedure was completed in full, and with it, he relinquished his mana forever. With the procedure concluded, Grambine's mana core was sealed forever, a feat witnessed by all present. His mother, Countess Stella, watched the scene, devastated, convinced her son's life was ruined. To her, Grambine, in his noble attempt to save her, had acted without understanding the harsh realities of the world. However, the young man tried to console his mother, asking her not to be so shocked and revealing a surprising secret. His true dream had always been to be an artist. Fury, however, overcame Stella's despair. With a violent effort, she broke free from her gag and, screaming, unleashed a torrent of curses upon Calyx, swearing he would pay dearly for his actions. The prince, for his part, analyzed the situation coldly. Without mana, Grambine would barely reach the level of a third-class knight. With great effort, he might reach the same level as Lila. A subtle unease struck him. A pang he questioned might be guilt. He quickly dismissed the feeling. This was just a game, and he was a character within it. Feeling pity now could cost him his life later. Having come this far, there was no turning back. With his decision made, Calyx ordered Russell to proceed with the penalties. The acting administrator formally announced that Countess Stella and her son Grambine would be confined to the palace annex until the investigation into their involvement in the crime was concluded. During this period, both were forbidden from contacting anyone from the outside. The punishment extended to the chief treasurer, Gidris, who was accused of leaking confidential documents, immediately stripped of his position and detained for questioning. Gidris tried to protest his innocence, but the sentence was already sealed. Arrogantly, he declared that no low-ranking soldier was worthy of touching him, an affront that earned him only an immediate and humiliating correction. Overpowered, the former treasurer was dragged out of the hall. The nobles present exchanged apprehensive glances, remembering that, until recently, Prince Calyx had possessed no significant political support. Now, Now, with the influential acting administrator Russell by his side, he held control over all the knights in the county. This alliance completely redefined the dispute for the throne's succession. Russell's calculated humility before the others served as a veiled warning. Opposing Prince Calyx would bring severe consequences. Continuing the purge, Russell approached the captain of the guard and suspended him from his duties, advising him to avoid contact with third parties to prevent misunderstandings. At that moment, a man stepped forward declaring that the entire failure was the result of his own negligence. He took full responsibility and offered his resignation. Calyx recognized him immediately. It was Garrod, an administrator respected for both his competence and his upstanding character. Pressuring him too much would be detrimental, but fortunately, the prince had already anticipated this move. Russell refused the resignation and instead handed Garrod a list with the names of all administrators suspected of involvement in the case. The order was clear: suspend the listed individuals and ensure the county's operations were not interrupted. Calyx then intervened, pointing out that, with the exception of 4, all treasurers were under investigation, making it inevitable that new officials would be sent to the finance department. Garrod appealed to the prince, asking for clemency on behalf of the less guilty. He argued that without experienced staff, the department would face serious operational problems. Calyx, however, remained adamant. To him, trust was paramount, and if he had to fire everyone to rebuild the department with loyal people, then so be it. He declared that it was unacceptable to halt the investigations for fear of an administrative gap. Garrod's justification, that they had simply chosen the wrong side, did not sway the prince from his decision. Calyx's relentless stance shocked Garrod, who saw him as completely different from the young prince he knew, an indecisive and soft-hearted boy, the complete opposite of the imposing figure before him. The other nobles watched the scene, terrified. If Russell was the symbol of military strength and Garrod that of the administration, seeing even the latter cornered by the prince was a frightening sign. Calyx sensed the fear he inspired. He now held all the power in the county, with the most influential men under his control. His journey within the game had just become much more interesting. Initially, Calyx had been worried, believing it would be a challenge to deal with Garrod. However, he now realized that individuals of that type were, in fact, surprisingly predictable. With this clarity in mind, his plan was to completely eliminate the opposing faction, also targeting those who remained neutral and those who had proven useless. His intention was to instigate a contest of loyalty, where only those who remained at the end would have their worth recognized. The prince's ruthless demeanor terrified everyone present. Some even feared they could be the next to fall if they angered him. To avoid such a fate, they began to act with subservient helpfulness, seeking to secure Calyx's favor. He, in turn, was pleased with the situation, though he maintained a cautious facade in public. Nearby, Russell observed every detail of the maneuver. That same night, the prince retired to his chambers, seeking rest after an exhausting day. Lying in his bed, Calyx reflected on the day's events. He remembered his past life, where both his studies and his appearance were merely average. As an upperclassman, he was nothing out of the ordinary. However, the belief that he could become special if he were the only one to win this game drove him forward. Once he was special, he would never be reduced to mediocrity again. His hope had ignited when he reached the end of the beta version, but the game's conclusion brought only frustration, as it meant a return to his ordinary life. Now, reborn in this new world, he had a new opportunity to be someone. He remembered that the original goal was to conquer the divine throne, and being so close, he felt that final victory was within his reach. A new realization struck him. Perhaps his wish to be reborn on the Aran continent had been granted. Calyx concluded that the system might have taken his words literally, transporting him into the game itself. Either way, the path back was closed. All that was left was to see it through to the end, and maybe the system would grant him a new wish as a reward. How he would complete the game was still a mystery, but for now, he decided to put those worries aside and surrender to sleep. The next day, Calyx awoke refreshed, and the question that arose was, where to begin? He knew all the counties in the game, but he had never heard of Sheikhan County before being reborn. As he looked for a map to get his bearings, his system surprised him with an alert. The conquest of the Aran continent was complete. As a reward, he received a treasure map that revealed the location of all important dungeons and relics. Being the first to achieve such a feat, he was also the first to possess such a powerful item. With access to so much information, he believed that moving forward would be much easier. Calyx recalled that he was in the Imperial year 289, and the journey of the original game's heroes would only begin in the year 294. This led him to a logical conclusion. If he didn't remember Sheikhan County, it was because the place had disappeared before the main plot began. Russell's mention of financial problems echoed in his mind. Upon checking the territory's financial status, his suspicions were confirmed. However, even facing a county doomed to fail, he would not give up. The The idea of gathering the remaining money and simply fleeing crossed Calix's mind. However, he quickly dismissed it. Money could be recovered, but the land was a family legacy, something he could not abandon. Analyzing the finances, Calix found that tax collection was on par with other territories, and there had been no recent increases in the military budget. The origin of the debts remained a mystery. Reviewing 10 years of data at once was an exhaustive task, but the bigger problem was something else. Trade with the desert kingdom of Medrosa and the plateau routes had been cut off. The drop in tariffs was inevitable, and taking on new loans was out of the question, as the annual interest exceeded an entire year's tax revenue. Tired of numbers and statistics, Calix longed for information that could actually solve the problem. It was then that a memory surfaced. There was someone in the prison perfect for what he needed. Determined, he headed there, intending to pressure Gidris and extract some useful information. Upon his arrival, the prison guard greeted him. "Prince, what is the reason for your visit?" "I want to see Gidris," Calix replied, noticing the unpleasant odor that permeated the underground air. "I never imagined I'd see a prince down here." Calix observed the guard. He knew this man was loyal to the former captain, and likely had a habit of bowing to the strongest. It was the perfect opportunity for a test. The captain of the guard was a man who easily surrendered to power. If there are innocent prisoners brought here by mistake, the right thing to do is give them a second chance to clear their names. The guard readily agreed with the prince. "On the other hand," Calix Shikin continued, "we must also review the cases where dangerous criminals were set free. I am leaving this duty under your responsibility from now on." Without hesitation, the guard accepted the mission. Calix reflected that after serving the captain for so long, the man was easily manipulated by a new authority figure. In that moment, he concluded that he had become just like the politicians he had always hated. In any case, he was there to see a prisoner, and it was time to go to the cell. As they approached, they heard Gidris complaining about the food. "I can't wait to get out of this filthy place." The prince stepped up to the bars. "Are you planning to escape from prison?" "I was waiting for you, Prince," Gidris said with a smug smile. "Have you finally remembered the debt you owe me? Have you gone mad enough to imagine things? I owe you no debt, and your days as a living man are numbered." "I served as this county's chief treasurer for over 20 years, Gidris claimed, unfazed. "I imagine your visit is related to the enormous debts that plague you. You are no longer the treasurer." "But I am the only one who can explain the origin of these debts," the old man retorted, which infuriated the prince. Calix turned to the guard. "Do we have an interrogator in this prison?" "Yes, my lord." "Bring him here, urgently." Noticing the seriousness in the prince's voice, the guard left immediately. Gidris, for his part, understood that he was not facing a naive young man, but the true power of Shekin County. With an interrogator on the way, his situation had just worsened drastically. "No matter how resilient you are," Calix Shekin said with a chilling calm, "sooner or later you will talk. In any case, I want to see your best. If it's moving enough, perhaps I'll trade the gallows for poison. The same one they used on me." From the prince's gaze, Gidris knew he was serious. Now he was truly in trouble. In a deplorable state, Gidris begged for his life, promising to provide any information that would help the prince recover his money. Calix, out of patience, ordered the former treasurer to tell him everything he knew. Gidris revealed that the county's debt was, in fact, a forged debt with a man named Gerard Milsurs. This man, in turn, managed the finances of House Kashalan and used the scheme to hide the mining tax owed to the royal palace. According to the old man, if Gerard were reported, Shekin County would be free from the obligation to repay him. However, the prince pointed out a crucial flaw in the plan. Gerard could simply sell the debt title to a third party for a lesser amount before being captured, which would only worsen the county of Shekin's problems. Faced with that logic, Gidris was stunned. It was a possibility he had never considered. At that moment, a guard returned with the interrogator, introducing him as the best the county of Shekin had to offer. A satisfied smile appeared on the prince's face, in stark contrast to the panic that seized Gidris. In a desperate attempt to bargain, the old prisoner claimed that Gerard handled at least 100,000 gold coins for the Koshalin family. The information, however, didn't seem to impress Calix, and Gidris's desperation only intensified. With a trembling voice, he revealed that he knew the location of the secret vault administered by Gerard. Calix, skeptical, retorted that if the vault was indeed secret, it was unlikely Gidris would know where it was. Seeing the interrogator prepare to begin his work, the old man swore on his life that he was telling the truth. The prince granted him one last chance. If it was true, why hadn't he plundered the vault himself? Gidris hesitated, and the interrogator announced he would start with the prisoner's fingers. The terror broke his resistance. Desperate, the old man confessed that he had already tried, but failed. Calyx correctly deduced that he wouldn't have acted alone. Gidris confirmed, admitting he had hired someone for the mission and paid in advance. "And how much did you pay this thief?" the prince asked. Gidris replied that he offered 3,000 gold coins for the job. The amount was so absurd that Calyx concluded the old man was even more foolish than he appeared. A loud, unexpected laugh echoed through the dungeon, startling everyone. The prince explained, incredulous, that the amount was half the annual income of his territory, money Gidris could only have obtained by stealing from the county's coffers. Gidris tried to justify himself, claiming he had no choice and that the plan would have worked if the vault's key hadn't been a magical crystal ball. Intrigued, the prince asked for more details. The old man explained that the hired thief demanded 2,500 gold coins just to create a replica of the key. Upon hearing this, Calyx declared that Gidris had been deceived, stating that the supposed thief was likely in collusion with Gerard from the very beginning. Despite everything, Gidris insisted the secret entrance was real, as he himself had seen Gerard open it with the crystal sphere. Pressed by the prince about the location, he revealed it was on the Golda Plateau. Although he didn't know the exact spot, as he had been taken there blindfolded, he was certain of the region. The information, though vague, didn't seem impossible. Calyx considered that he would need to investigate thoroughly to confirm it. He searched his memory for someone familiar with the Golda Plateau until a name emerged. Lila, the girl, an orphan from that region, would be the perfect guide. With a plan forming in his mind, the prince decided to leave the prison. "What about me? What will become of me?" Gidris shouted, but the prince ignored him, leaving him behind. Outside, Calyx's anger was still simmering, not just because of the theft, but because of the stupidity with which Gidris had been deceived. An exemplary punishment would be necessary. Turning to the guard accompanying him, he asked if the man knew anything. The guard promptly denied it, hiding the fact that he had been bribed by Gidris to keep quiet. Calyx then laid the bait, claiming that Gidris had confessed everything while the guard was away. The man continued to deny it, but the prince cut him off, saying he wasn't an idiot. With no escape, the guard fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness and blaming Gidris for everything. However, upon getting up, he realized he was alone. The prince had disappeared. Aware that he was in serious trouble, he decided he needed to settle the score with Gidris for giving him up. Little did the guard know that it was all part of the plan. From the shadows, Calyx watched his trap work perfectly. Suddenly, a presence approached from behind. A sinister aura enveloped him, and a shiver of dread ran down his spine. Startled, Calyx questioned who was hiding in the shadows. A man introduced himself as Kraut Salim, and the prince immediately noticed his formidable strength, finding it strange he had never heard of him before. Upon analyzing his status, Calyx realized that Kraut was about to reach level 100, a feat that would put him on the same level as the greatest warriors on the continent. Furthermore, it was extremely rare to find someone with A-class military skills. A dark suspicion took hold of Calyx. Perhaps this man was the Herald of Death, a disguised demon whose true face was unknown even to the Dark Prince. However, he dismissed the idea as an exaggeration. After all, descriptions of the Herald painted a thin, shadowy figure, while Kraut was muscular and completely different from that profile, not to mention his eyes were far too clear. For now, Calyx decided it would be beneficial to keep Kraut close. Kraut, for his part, explained that he had called for the prince several times without getting a response. He informed him that a merchant named Gerard Milsers had requested an audience, which was why he had been searching for him. Calyx reflected, ironically, that before he could even look for Gerard, the merchant himself had come to him. At that moment, the visitor approached and formally introduced himself to the Prince of Shekin. Calyx mentioned he had heard of Gerard's corporation, acknowledging that although small, it was quite solid. "Competent merchants are always welcome," he stated. Gerard declared he was flattered, but Calyx countered that he did not yet hold an official position or authority, and that any business matters should be discussed with the acting administrator, Russell. The merchant argued that while Baron Russell managed the territory, the true owner was the prince, and for that reason, no one would dare question his decisions. "I am merely the heir." "I dislike being overestimated," Calyx replied. Gerard smiled, calling him modest, but then revealed he knew the competition for the throne's succession had already ended, with Calyx as the victor. Surprised, the prince retorted that there had been no formal announcement yet, and questioned how he had obtained such information. "I have my ways," Gerard said, apologizing if he had caused any trouble. "I've survived this long in commerce thanks to my information network." In his thoughts, however, Gerard assessed that the prince before him was no naive boy. To him, Calyx was cynical and astute. Was it possible that a young man, who had not even reached adulthood, had deceived the entire world by hiding his true nature? Furthermore, the prince's appearance was enchanting, a beauty so stunning it could make even another man's heart race. Gerard concluded that Calyx was definitively to his liking. Sensing that something was wrong, Calyx stood up abruptly. I am not an idle man. If you have nothing more to say, you should leave. The meeting couldn't end now, or Gerard's plan would be ruined. He needed to keep the boy there. I apologize for taking up your time, he said, trying to buy a moment. Calyx wondered what kind of scheme the man was plotting, but ordered him to get straight to the point. It was then that Gerard revealed the true reason for the audience, the massive debt the late Count owed him. Feigning ignorance, Calyx claimed it was the first time he had heard of the matter, commenting on how strange it was for such a debt to surface just when the chief treasurer was imprisoned. Gerard had expected this reaction, confident the tactic wouldn't work. His intention was to reveal to the young man the crushing debt his family carried, and to savor the look of despair on his face up close. To him, witnessing such a scene was the greatest pleasure life could offer. He explained that, according to the contract, 3 years after the loan was made, he could demand payment in full. Restraining himself from exposing his true intentions, he declared, "The full amount is 60,000 gold coins, and I would like to receive the entire sum." The revelation surprised only Kraut. Calyx didn't understand why his guard was so startled. Gerard, on the other hand, interpreted the prince's calmness as a facade, imagining that anyone in that situation would be panicking. To him, it was only a matter of time before the boy broke down in tears. While Prince Calyx maintained a cold and calculating posture, Kraut desperately tried to negotiate for more time to make the payment. The merchant Gerard, however, was inflexible, claiming that the county's credibility had plummeted after the death of Count Colin. He stated that in the name of their former trust, he had postponed the collection for a year, but now the prince, as the future leader, should repay that patience by settling the amount due. In a panic, Kraut wondered what they could do. Calyx, however, saw through the merchant's ploy. He had appeared 2 weeks before the deadline, revealing his complete lack of generosity. Taking control of the conversation, the prince informed him that his territory's annual revenue was approximately 6,000 gold coins, but that he could obtain a loan of 60,000 from somewhere else to settle the debt. The declaration surprised Kraut, and although it also caught Gerard off guard, the merchant remained firm. He doubted anyone would lend such a sum, considering the young prince naive for even entertaining the idea. Still, he announced he would return soon to finalize the agreement. In his thoughts, Gerard already saw himself as the owner of the county, certain it was only a matter of time. He departed, savoring the future image of the prince kneeling at his feet, begging. The young noble's beauty even made him consider selling him as a slave after having his fun with him, and with these vile thoughts, Gerard left. Leaving behind a seemingly pensive prince, Kraut expressed his anguish, declaring the amount absurd and the payment impossible. Calyx, however, cut him off sharply, telling him not to bother him with the matter. The advisor couldn't understand the prince's calmness in the face of losing their territory. Little did he know that Calyx's mind was already focused on another objective, reaching the secret vault on the Golda Plateau. He reflected that the continent of Erin was not a place to be traveled lightly. The journey would require caution. The Golda Plateau, in particular, was a region difficult to access, infested with dangerous monsters. In his past life as Sunbei, he had always avoided that area as much as possible. Now, however, there was no escaping it. As Calyx set off, Kraut asked where he was going. The prince knew he needed someone who knew the plateau well, and he already had the perfect person in mind. He headed to the prison, where he was greeted by a guard who expressed what an honor his visit was. Calyx stated his wish to see a specific prisoner, and informed the guard that Kraut would be accompanying him. The surprised counselor remarked that this was the cell where Gidris had been held. Upon entering, Calyx noticed the place was surprisingly tidy and cozy. Lila approached, explaining she had made a few adjustments. When I arrived, this place was decorated with expensive, flashy items. It's not my style. Calyx observed her and asked, "Are you enjoying your stay?" "You can see with your own eyes that I am," she replied with a wry smile. Irritated, Kraut reprimanded the girl, demanding she behave herself before the prince. Lila, however, ignored him, fixing her gaze on Calyx. "You tricked me." She had believed he had poisoned her, but the prince retorted that she had quickly realized it was all a bluff. From his unexpected visit, Lila deduced that he needed her help. "I have no intention of cooperating willingly," she declared, "but if you're convincing enough, I might change my mind." Kraut exploded with anger. "How dare you say such things to the prince?" Calyx, however, stopped him from advancing. "I'm here to give you a second chance, Lila." "What are you talking about?" the girl questioned. The prince explained that even if he freed her, she wouldn't survive long out there, given the rivalry between the Shikan and Kosala families. Lila accused him of turning Stella into a villain and forcing her son to end his mana cycle. "And you are the key witness to all of it," Calyx countered. In that instant, the truth hit her. The Kosala family wanted her head for testifying against the Countess. She had still hoped her family would save her, and didn't understand understand why they were now hunting her. Gambine's mana core will not return, Calyx continued, relentless. You helped ruin your family's plan forever, and there's nothing you can do to change that. You've become disposable, and the Kosalas don't usually leave loose ends. Lila knew it was true. Many members of her family had been eliminated for far less. She just never imagined she would be next. Consumed by fury, she grabbed the nearest object and lunged at the prince, blaming him for her misfortune. If there was no salvation, the only thing left for her was to finish what she had started. In the midst of her desperate attempt to harm the prince, Kraut acted quickly in his defense, stopping Lila from carrying out the attack. Calyx thanked him for his help, but warned his ally not to underestimate the woman, as she had been an essential piece in his plan to become the next ruler of the county. The prince explained that people often hate those who force them to face their own weaknesses more than those who plunge them into them. It's an easier path, he claimed, as unloading anger on a convenient target brings immediate relief, even if they aren't the true culprit. Furthermore, he recognized that Lila was not the type to give up easily, sensing a strong survival instinct in her. Lila, in turn, firmly declared that she would not die and would do whatever it took to stay alive. Faced with such determination, the prince revealed he had a proposal that might interest her, promising to ensure Lila's safety in exchange for her help on a secret mission. He extended this protection to anyone she cared about, which Lila immediately interpreted as a veiled threat. She retorted, stating she would not allow her people to be used as hostages. However, the prince corrected the misunderstanding, stating that he cared neither for Lila nor her family, as there were many others with similar skills. The young woman reflected that there was no lie in his words. After all, people like her were easily replaceable. Still, she questioned him. Then why me? Why did you choose me instead of someone else? Calyx mentioned that he remembered something she had said, leaving her confused. Without further explanation, he gave her 1 minute to decide. Although the idea displeased her, Lila pondered that she had no choice. The prince was right. She herself had hunted traitors in the past and knew the same fate awaited her if she were simply set free. Driven by the desire to survive at all costs, she accepted the proposal. Lila believed that both families were past the point of no return, and that soon, one of them would disappear completely. Therefore, she chose the winning side. Calyx expressed his satisfaction with her answer. However, Lila imposed her conditions. She would not be a subordinate, but a hired mercenary, and she would not accept orders that weren't directly related to the mission. Kraut grew irritated at such audacity, but Lila clarified that she didn't intend to be disrespectful, only that she demanded the same respect in return, which included proper payment for her services. She finished by declaring that from that moment on, they were allies and should not fight amongst themselves. The idea of having Lila as an ally clearly displeased Kraut. Breaking the tension, the prince recalled that Lila had mentioned the Kosala family's shadow unit, which trained at a camp on the Golda Plateau. And what does that have to do with the mission? She asked. Ignoring the question for a moment, Calyx asked Kraut for a detailed map of the kingdom and the region surrounding the Kosala family's lands. The soldier informed him that a map with those specifications was in the meeting room and offered to take the prince there. The prince, however, hesitated, which piqued Kraut's curiosity. Calyx brushed it off, saying it was nothing, and asked the soldier to lead the way. "Do you not know the way, your highness?" his ally questioned. Indeed, he did not know, but admitting it was out of the question, so he just insisted that Kraut guide him. Moments later, they arrived at the barracks meeting room. Kraut presented the map, describing it as one of the most precious on the continent of Aran, a highly accurate, confidential military document. The prince pointed to the Golda Plateau and asked the soldier to reveal everything he knew about the place. Kraut explained that the area was famous for the territorial dispute between the Kosala family and the barony of Erebon, both of whom claimed ownership. He added that there was a high-quality copper mine there, its development stalled by the conflict. The advantage, according to him, was that the barony of Erebon was a vassal of the Shekin family. Calyx observed that the map seemed outdated, and Kraut himself admitted he couldn't guarantee the accuracy of all the information. Lila intervened, stating that she knew the area like the back of her hand, and that with a few recent adjustments, the map would become perfectly functional. At this, the prince revealed his true objective. On the Golda Plateau, there was an ancient ruin he wished to explore. The mercenary claimed she had never heard of such a place. The prince then prodded her with a question. "When you were little, wasn't there a place the adults forbade you from visiting?" The question hit its mark, and an important memory surfaced in Lila's mind. Lila confirmed that such a place existed. Intrigued, Calyx asked her how long the Kosala family had been keeping that secret. She revealed she was the 6th generation of her family and had been in the field for 5 years, estimating it had all started about 15 years ago. Kraut noted that the land dispute between the Kosala and Erebon families had also begun around the same time. Lila, impatient, asked if he was understanding the situation. At Kraut's denial, she called him useless, and the two began to argue again. The prince intervened, putting an end to the fight. He explained that to train a large army, a colossal volume of resources would be needed, making a sudden increase in troops nearly impossible. This meant someone was supplying a vast sum of money to the Kosala family, and the source of such income could only have been discovered 15 years ago. With these funds, they would have secretly trained soldiers for clandestine missions, just as they did with Lila. Confused, the girl asked what this had to do with the ruins. Calyx clarified that it's common to find copper and silver mines together. One of his allies interjected, recalling that secretly mining silver was a crime. He asked if the prince suspected the Kosala family of committing such an act, and Calyx confirmed his suspicion. Although the mines were on their territory, the law dictated that the mining of gold and silver was the property of the crown. Therefore, it was highly likely that nobles had concealed this information, and the story of a dangerous ruin would be the perfect cover for their operations. Lila questioned if Calyx's plan was to declare war on another territory to seize their source of income. Kraut promptly dismissed the idea, stating that the prince's county lacked the power for such a feat. Calyx agreed, aware that an attempt to take the wealth by force would alert the crown and bring them serious trouble. Faced with the impasse, Lila asked what the plan was. The prince then revealed his strategy. All the illegally accumulated money had to be stored in a single place. If someone were to steal that fortune, the Kosalas couldn't report the crime without incriminating themselves. The plan, therefore, was simple and audacious, to steal everything they were hiding. That same night, as the prince prepared to leave, he was approached by Russell. The interim administrator expressed his concern, reminding him that the Golda Plateau was a dangerous place, and questioning the decision to leave Kraut in command. He tried to persuade Calyx to reconsider, arguing that forcing an unnecessarily risky situation was a grave mistake. Calyx realized Russell was acting like a worried grandfather and reassured him, guaranteeing he would be fine. He explained that young men like Kraut needed to mature quickly so they could all advance toward their goals together. Besides, he couldn't take Russell on the mission, as the simultaneous absence of them both would leave the territory vulnerable. Russell admitted the prince was right, and, respecting his decision, wished him luck. However, he warned that if anything happened to Calyx, Kraut would be held responsible. The young warrior assured him he would take care of his master. Russell stared at him seriously, ordering him to do his job properly, or there would be consequences. Then, turning to the soldiers, Russell declared that although the prince had barely recovered, his concern for the territory drove him to take risks for the good of all. He then ordered every man present to protect the prince on this mission, even if it cost them their own lives. Calyx reflected that no soldier would want to serve a weak lord. Strengthening his men's trust was also his responsibility. Furthermore, he would need to keep Lila under surveillance. With the preparations finalized, the group headed to an underground passage. Kraut was the first to descend into the shaft, followed closely by the prince. The warrior explained that the tunnel would lead them out of the castle, but warned that the distance was long and that everyone should stick together. After walking for some time, they finally reached the exit. Kraut had some difficulty opening the heavy iron door. While he waited, Calyx thought it was good to have Kraut around, as he would have never found this path alone. As soon as the door gave way, they prepared to exit. Upon glimpsing what was on the other side, the prince was genuinely surprised. Calyx didn't know his location, but Kraut soon informed him that they were in an abandoned watermill. Outside, a carriage was already waiting for them, ready for departure. Kraut indicated that the prince should get on the horse, but was promptly interrupted. "Don't call me prince," Calyx warned, reminding him they were in disguise. For the sake of the mission, avoid formalities outside the castle. Calyx observed his men dressed as merchants, and felt the disguise wasn't convincing enough. He turned to his ally. "Did you prepare everything I asked for?" Kraut confirmed, but hesitated. "Do we really have to wear something so foul-smelling?" With a wry smile, Calyx offered the alternatives. "If you prefer, you can wear the porter's clothes, or perhaps take on the role of a newlywed alongside Lila." The suggestion was met with vehemence. Kraut would never allow his lord to submit to such a role, loudly declaring his complete distrust of Lila, much to the prince's fury. In an attempt to salvage the situation, Kraut himself offered to act as Lila's husband, who, in turn, showed clear displeasure at the idea. Calyx immediately realized this would be a disaster. The acting from both of them was deplorable, and he had no intention of witnessing their bickering for the entire journey. In moments like these, he almost forgot that this was all a game. Certain situations were so vivid they blurred with reality. journey. The ideal solution, he pondered, would be for Lila to have a chance to prove her worth to her companions. He even considered the possibility of helping her secretly. However, their focus needed to return to the journey. With the sun already setting, there was no time to waste. At Calix's command, Kraut gathered the group, and finally, the caravan set off. The journey was long, marked by nightly encampments and stops to replenish their dwindling supplies. Despite the hardships, Calix enjoyed the feeling of being on the road. During one of their encampments, Kraut informed him that they had passed the last rural village in the region. That was the signal. Calix ordered everyone to drop their disguises and prepare for the imminent combat. By dawn, the atmosphere had changed. "Now the real work begins," Calix announced, preparing his men for the resistance they would surely face ahead. It wasn't long before Kraut noticed an unusual movement. The scouts sent ahead were returning. One of them approached, breathless, to report the presence of a group of forest giants up ahead, numbering at least 5. Calix called his ally and pointed to the trees. "Lift me up, I want to see for myself." Obeying promptly, Kraut launched the prince into the air, perhaps with a bit too much enthusiasm. Even so, the goal was achieved. From the treetops, Calix spotted the enemies. Indeed, a group of formidable monsters was hiding in the forest, a threat that could not be underestimated. He climbed down and turned to his companion. "What's the plan, Kraut?" The knight responded immediately, suggesting they block the monster's escape route with fire arrows. Calix's expression, however, made it clear he thought it was a terrible idea. Calix immediately rejected the idea. An experimental, untested method was an invitation to disaster. He was certain that no one on the continent understood more about monsters than he did, but the real challenge was convincing his allies of this truth. Excited, Kraut declared he would carry out the plan on his own. Calix sighed inwardly. Even if he managed to persuade Kraut, the others would be an even bigger obstacle, and to his dismay, they were already on the move. That couldn't be called a plan. It was pure recklessness. However, it seemed he was the only one who saw the danger. Calix concluded that the only way to make them listen was by demonstrating the power of his abilities. He needed to earn their respect, or he would continue to be seen as just a burden. While the others busied themselves with preparations, Calix remained motionless, pondering how he could prove his worth. That's when Lila approached him. "I have something to discuss with you." Her voice was low and serious. "Kraut's plan is terrible. Everyone who follows it will die. The knight is fearless, I won't deny that, and he's willing to risk his own life, but it's an unnecessary risk." "I know that," Calix replied sharply. "Then why haven't you done anything?" "Because I'm trying to find a way to overcome this crisis while also keeping them under control." "I have an idea," Lila said. Calix prompted her to continue. "The Big Feet have a very strong bond with their young. As soon as the battle begins, their priority will be to protect them. The females will retreat to take the young to a safe place while the males buy time. But once the offspring are safe, they will return to fight." "I already know that," Calix cut in. "Get to the point. How do we use this to our advantage?" Lila seemed surprised by his coldness, but she nodded. "First, I need to confirm something. Is our goal to eliminate them, or just to get past them and continue our journey?" "Just get past them. Then we can make them believe their hideout is no longer safe." She explained that 5 groups of Big Feet were blocking the path. The plan was to use Kraut to draw the attention of one group, while another team would circle around the area to threaten their hideout. The maneuver, even if temporary, would force the monsters to retreat to protect their young, creating the opening they needed to advance. "I thought of the same strategy," Calix admitted, "but I hesitated on a crucial point. Who would be sent to find and attack the hideout? The monsters, enraged and desperate to protect their offspring, would completely lose control and hunt down the invading group without mercy. It would be a suicide mission." "I'll go." To his surprise, Lila volunteered. "That was my intention from the start." Calix stared at her. His eyes narrowed. "You have a nymph's potion, don't you?" The astonishment on Lila's face was evident. "How do you know?" "You wouldn't accept such a dangerous mission without an ace up your sleeve. And I know that with the right herb, it's possible to lure the Big Feet wherever you want." Lila observed him for a moment. "I've known the prince for some time, but you've changed a lot lately." "It's a good plan," Calix conceded, "but the execution needs to be perfect." "Don't worry, I've known this place since I was a child. I can take care of myself." "Why are you helping me?" he questioned. "If your family falls, mine falls with it," she replied pragmatically. "I need you to survive." The logic was undeniable. "It won't be easy to gain the others' recognition with this." "Are you aware of that?" Lila just nodded. "Before you go, I need to tell you something." Calix pointed to a distant mountain. "When dealing with Big Feet, always assume there are at least 2 more than the number you see. There's a saying that the hunters always return to attack from behind. I believe there are 2 potential hideouts." "I know one of them," said Lila. "The Goblin Hill." just ahead. It's a place frequently used by monsters. That information is valuable, the prince affirmed. Now we can proceed. Despite the difficulties, we don't have many options. Lila assumed he would instruct the knights to protect the strategic points, but Calyx interrupted her. First, I have a few requests to make. From a short distance away, Kraut watched their conversation, his brow furrowed at their unusual proximity. Oblivious to the knight's gaze, the prince made his request in a low voice. Lila's cheeks flushed, a glint of interest in her eyes. Calyx felt a chill, thinking she might have misinterpreted his words. But instead of pulling away, she took a step forward, closing the distance between them in a way that left him completely bewildered, unsure of what she would do next. However, Lila's gesture was surprisingly simple. Delicately, she just removed a speck of dust from Calyx's face. The action, however trivial, was enough to leave the prince completely flustered, making him feel as exposed as a devoted fan risking it all for an autograph from their idol. Amidst the tension, Kraut appeared, questioning what was going on between the two of them. Calyx promptly denied anything was amiss and ordered his ally to prepare Lila's equipment, explaining that she was about to start a mission. He also warned Kraut not to be surprised if she disappeared along the way. With brutal honesty, Kraut admitted he didn't trust Lila and asked why the prince would assign her to such a crucial task. Calyx, in turn, simply asked his ally to trust his judgment, with no further questions. After all, they all shared the same precarious situation, and mutual trust was essential for survival. Reluctantly, the soldier decided to obey the prince's order. Next, Lila declared she would get her own equipment. Without hesitation, she removed her cloak in front of everyone, causing widespread shock. Ignoring the astonished gazes, the young woman focused on putting on her armor, meticulously preparing for the mission. To finish, she applied a substance with a peculiar odor to her body, a tactic to throw the monsters off her trail. Despite his mistrust, Kraut couldn't help but acknowledge the girl's courage. Lila, for her part, seemed oblivious to the commotion, her mind focused solely on the task ahead. Once ready, she asked if she could begin the plan. The prince nodded, offering her an escort of soldiers, but she refused the offer, arguing that no one would obey her and that it would be more efficient to act alone. With that said, she left without looking back. Kraut announced that his group also needed to leave and, without delay, led his men onto the field. It wasn't long before they encountered the monsters. Watching the scene, Calyx noticed the wind was blowing toward the Bigfoot village. Lila, however, had gone in the opposite direction, against the wind. The prince concluded, frustrated, that he still didn't understand her strategy. In any case, it was too late. The monsters had already noticed the group's presence. Without hesitation, Kraut launched into an attack, managing to strike one of the Bigfoots. However, the cut was shallow. From his position, Calyx assessed the charge as a tactical error. The correct approach would have been to exploit a weak point, not a hasty advance. Kraut himself seemed to realize his mistake the moment the enraged creature prepared its counterattack. The monster threw a powerful punch, which the soldier managed to block just in time. From a distance, Calyx watched the scene, amazed to witness a battle of that magnitude. Unfortunately for Kraut, however, his provocation had enraged the enemy. With a deafening roar, the creature alerted the other monsters of its kind. Faced with the situation, Calyx pondered that a fire attack might be the best alternative. Still, the knight prepared to advance with his men, shouting for the young master not to stray too far. When the monsters charged again, Kraut was ready, channeling his energy into his sword's blade. He unleashed a devastating counterattack, which exploded in a wave of power and caused massive destruction on the battlefield. With the monster finally defeated, Kraut exultantly sought Prince Calyx's approval. However, the prince remained impassive, his gaze fixed on the mission's objective. Kraut's brief satisfaction was cut short by an alarming sound. Turning around, he witnessed his comrades being slaughtered. Less skilled, the soldiers had become easy prey for the remaining creatures. Without hesitation, the captain dove into the fray to help his men, ordering them to hold formation. Kraut realized that taking them down one by one would be impossible. A new strategy was needed. He continued to fight, but each blow revealed the enemies were far more resilient than expected. In a moment of distraction, Kraut was knocked down, leaving him dangerously vulnerable. However, as one of the monsters moved in for the final blow, he anticipated the movement and counterattacked with precision. The creature roared in pain. "This is our chance!" the captain shouted. But a chill ran down his spine as he noticed something was wrong. In his initial reconnaissance, he had counted 8 enemies. The 8th was nowhere to be found. He had barely finished his sentence when the last creature emerged from the shadows, ignoring the soldiers and charging directly at the prince. Crouch shot forward to protect his master, but Albu, Calix's personal bodyguard, was already moving to intercept the threat. "Fall back, your highness," he ordered, as he threw himself at the monster to protect the prince. The creature vanished in the blink of an eye. "Was it defeated?" the prince asked. To everyone's horror, the monster reappeared amidst the smoke, moving with supernatural speed toward Albu. The bodyguard didn't stand a chance. He was brutally thrown aside with a single blow. Calix watched, paralyzed, the overwhelming power of the enemy. A soldier named Thomas stood beside the prince. "Stay back, master," he warned, before charging the creature in a desperate attempt to buy time. The blow, however, was ineffective. "If we keep this up, we'll all be wiped out," Calix declared, his voice firm. "We can hold on a little longer," Thomas insisted. "Holding on is pointless when there are no reinforcements coming," the prince retorted. "If the others fall, you'll have to face it alone. The situation will only get worse." The soldier hesitated. His orders were clear. Never leave the prince unprotected. However, Calix's logic was irrefutable. Using his authority, the prince ordered, "Leave me here and go help your comrades in battle." Understanding he couldn't disobey a direct order, Thomas nodded and advanced toward the main fight. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the battlefield, an ally lay fallen on the ground. Calix found Albu, who had been brutally thrown aside. The soldier was gravely wounded, but still breathing. After removing the damaged armor, Calix offered him a potion, but quickly realized the young man's injuries were too deep for a low-quality elixir. The only hope would be a healing mage or a much more potent potion. Wielding his sword, he promised Albu he would return with help. Sometime later, Calix confirmed Lila's information was correct when he found the goblin camp, the nauseating feeding ground of the Bigfoots. The scene was repulsive, and the mere possibility of being discovered meant certain death. He recalled the plan. Lila would prepare the traps while the soldiers served as bait. However, a cold fear ran through him. This wasn't a game. He wasn't in the comfort of his room in front of a computer. Now the action was real, in the flesh. Despite the imminent danger, he decided to act, provoking one of the monsters. The creature didn't hesitate and charged furiously toward him. However, before it could reach him, wooden stakes shot up from the ground, piercing the monster from behind. The enemy fell, defeated before it could even touch the prince. The scene enraged another Bigfoot, which, blinded by vengeance, lunged at Calix. This time, there were no visible traps to save him. He was on his own. With an agile movement, the prince managed to dodge the devastating blow. Before the creature could charge again, a sticky net completely enveloped it, immobilizing it. Calix recognized the trap immediately. Arachne's web, likely combined with Triton's potion on the tips of the spikes. A lethal combination against most monsters. Lila, he thought, had hidden herself with impressive mastery, completely masking her scent to the point that her approach was unnoticeable. With the enemy contained, it was time to finish the job. He advanced, sword in hand. For the first time, he felt the resistance of flesh yielding to his blade. The sensation was visceral and unpleasant. In a game, it was just a command, a click. In real life, the experience of taking a life was completely different, something that filled him with revulsion. Besides, there was something strange. For a monster that fought on equal footing with a fourth-class knight, its final resistance was surprisingly weak. Absorbed in his thoughts, for a brief and dangerous moment, Calix forgot where he was. It was a fatal lapse. He realized too late that a new enemy was watching him from the shadows. Prince Calix narrowly escaped the enemy's blow, saved once again by the intervention of the soldier, Albu. Still stunned by the sudden attack, Calix composed himself in time to identify his aggressor, a goblin. Beside him, Albu lay on the ground again, and fury consumed the prince upon seeing the monster injure a man who was already incapacitated. Driven by rage, Calix brandished his sword, but his strike cut only air. The goblin, with repulsive agility, dodged with ease and launched a counterattack. The creature's blade tore through the fabric of the prince's clothes, who narrowly avoided a serious wound. The harsh reality hit him. His inexperience with the sword put him at a complete disadvantage against the monster's speed. Despite the clear disadvantage, a spark of determination kept him from retreating. The goblin advanced, and Calix lunged with his sword once more, missing the target by a frustrating margin. This time, however, the creature revealed a hidden dagger, delivering a treacherous blow. Luck, his only ally so far, allowed him to dodge, but the awareness that it would soon run out weighed on his mind. As the monster closed in for the final blow, Calix's lack of skill left him at its mercy. It was then that survival instinct overcame technique. With a precise and desperate kick, he knocked the dagger from the creature's hands. Disarmed, the goblin was vulnerable for a crucial moment. Calyx seized the opening, channeling all his fury into a single, powerful thrust. The force of the impact was so overwhelming that it impaled the monster against the trunk of a nearby tree. Exhausted, the prince watched the gruesome scene, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. This was not a game. The feeling of imminent death had been all too real. The moment the creature drew its last breath, a system notification appeared in his vision, announcing his victory in his first battle and the reward of an inventory. Shortly after, Kraut appeared in the clearing, concern etched on his face. His gaze, however, soon fixed on the bizarre scene. A goblin impaled on a tree and a Bigfoot caught in an ingenious trap. "My lord, are you injured?" "No, I'm fine. Fortunately, after we took down the two of them, the rest of the pack retreated. We were lucky." It wasn't luck, it was Lila's plan, Calyx thought. And Albu? Where is he? He was right here. Kraut simply pointed to a spot further into the clearing. As he followed the indicated direction, the prince's heart froze with worry for his loyal soldier. Prince Calyx reflected on what had happened. On such a dangerous mission, it was natural to expect casualties, but he never imagined one of them would be Albu. Seeing his companion's body, an overwhelming weight settled upon Calyx, who blamed himself in a low voice, attributing the tragedy to his own carelessness. The prince's suffering did not go unnoticed by his men. Kraut approached and tried to comfort him, stating that it wasn't his fault. A soldier's duty is to protect his master, and Albu had fulfilled his mission with honor. Angered, Calyx refuted the idea. To him, there was no such thing as an honorable death. Kraut pondered that this was likely the first time the prince had lost a subordinate, making his pain understandable. However, Calyx did not yet know the full extent of the loss. His attention was caught by more bodies being carried into the camp. "What happened?" he asked, his voice tense. Kraut revealed the harsh truth. 3 soldiers were dead, and 1 was lightly wounded. The news washed over the prince like a new wave of despair. Calyx's guilt deepened. He blamed himself, convinced that if he had used all of his knowledge, no one would have died. His own survival felt like a sham, secured only by Lila's traps and Albu's sacrifice. His frustration overflowed into a cry of pure rage, startling the surrounding soldiers. Composing himself, Calyx declared that the bodies needed immediate care and ordered Kraut to prepare them in the most dignified manner possible. The general promptly instructed his men to act, but as he observed their expressions, he noticed something unexpected. The prince's genuine concern for his fallen men had moved them deeply. In their eyes, Kraut no longer saw mere duty, but a renewed and fierce determination to protect their lord at all costs. The prince had at last earned the loyalty of his men. A short time later, Kraut reported that the preparations were complete. The bodies of the deceased had been treated with preservation potions. Everyone awaited the prince's command to proceed. Calyx felt the change in the atmosphere. The soldiers' gazes now carried a new intensity. He understood there was no longer room for weakness or guilt. His role was to lead and inspire hope. Raising his voice, he congratulated everyone for their bravery in battle, reminding them that the mission was not yet over. "The healthy will care for the wounded," Calyx ordered with unshakable authority. "No one will be left behind." At his command, the soldiers responded in unison. An hour earlier, Lila was advancing on her own mission through the Bigfoot forest. A moment of carelessness was all it took for her presence to be detected. She came face to face with one of the creatures and narrowly avoided being hit by a devastating attack. However, instead of being shaken, the experienced warrior reacted with precision. Avoiding a direct confrontation, she prioritized strategy. With agility, Lila used a rope to climb to the top of a tall tree, turning her climbing tool into a weapon. Taking advantage of the high ground, she lassoed the creature, which was immobilized by the rope. The trap worked perfectly, and for a moment Lila believed she had won the fight without much effort. To her surprise, the creature, which had seemed subdued, awoke with renewed fury. In an act of brute force, the monster uprooted the very tree that held it and brandished it like a colossal club. The counterattack was so sudden and violent that Lila was caught completely off guard. The monster charged at Lila with full fury, but like an experienced professional, she dodged at the last second. With an agile movement, she seized the opening to tie up the creature once more, securing it firmly between the trees. This time, Lila was confident. The rope she had used was much stronger, and she believed any attempt by the monster to escape would be futile. However, the creature's strength was so immense that it began to uproot the very tree that imprisoned it. Faced with this, Lila's only alternative was to inject the Triton's potion directly into the beast's bloodstream, and she had to act fast before it was too late. The creature, for its part, did not wait passively. It launched a violent attack that nearly hit Lila, but she managed to dodge again. In that brief moment, she readied the syringe and injected the potion directly into onto the monster's back, in a spot it couldn't reach to remove. Even with the successful injection, Lila doubted it would be enough, but there was no other choice but to trust the plan. Enraged, the Bigfoot thrashed about with tremendous aggression. The tension was so great that one of the trees gave way with a snap, and Lila realized her trap would not hold it for much longer. However, luckily for her, the creature's agitation only accelerated the potion's dispersal through its body. Suddenly, the beast collapsed, falling unconscious to the ground. Lila watched, surprised. The potion had worked at the exact right moment. Though reluctant to admit it, she concluded that when it came to poisons, the prince was one step ahead of her. Still, the drastic change in his behavior overnight intrigued her. She had observed Calyx for an entire year, which made her perfectly capable of noticing any change. In any case, perhaps this change wasn't entirely bad. Before, she thought her personal revenge would be unattainable, but now she was starting to change her mind. Meanwhile, Prince Calyx was advancing with his army until he noticed the evident exhaustion of his men. He informed Kraut they would take a break to rest before proceeding. As soon as the march halted, the prince approached the soldiers, bringing recovery potions with him. Surprise was visible on the men's faces, as it was not common for them to receive such valuable items. Calyx instructed them to drink to speed up their recovery, but Kraut intervened, much to the prince's irritation. The general explained that even though they were low-grade potions, they were very expensive and had been prepared by Viscount Russell exclusively for him. Worse still, that represented half of the entire kingdom's stock. Irritated, Calyx retorted that he couldn't just watch his men suffer. Kraut tried to defend himself, claiming that wasn't his intention, but his words failed to convince the prince. "Don't worry, General," Calyx said with conviction. "After this expedition, we'll have so many potions in stock we'll be able to drink them like water." What happened next surprised the prince. In a gesture of profound gratitude, all the soldiers rose and bowed before him. Watching the scene, Kraut reflected. A man is willing to give his life for one who recognizes his worth, and he knew that, in that moment, this was exactly how all his men felt. Calyx, for his part, felt embarrassed by the display of loyalty and stepped away for a moment. He decided to check his status and noticed his support rate had increased considerably. With this confirmation, he judged it the ideal time to press on. Soon, the caravan resumed its march, with the prince eager to finally reach his destination. Midway through the journey, Calyx ordered the convoy to halt, announcing they had finally reached their destination. Kraut, however, surveyed the surroundings and saw no secret vault, only an unprotected area with no guards. He wondered if the place had been abandoned, his concern growing as he noted that Lila had still given no sign since they had parted ways. Ignoring the confusion, the prince ordered them to make camp, instructing that a tent be erected on the exact spot he indicated. With the structure ready, he pointed to a location on the map, revealing what he believed to be the vault's true location. The spot, however, was a considerable distance from where they were. Kraut protested, calculating that if the location was correct, it would take them another week of forced marching. He warned that the soldiers were already at the limit of their exhaustion, moving forward on sheer willpower alone, and that another week of travel would leave half the contingent behind. Thomas intervened, adding that this wasn't even the worst of their problems. Remaining stationary for so long would make them an easy target, allowing the enemy to discover their position and suspect their plans. Calyx, however, interrupted them, stating they had misunderstood everything. He explained that, although he had pointed to the vault's location on the map, he had no intention of marching there. Confused, Kraut asked, "But wasn't that the purpose of the mission? Is the prince giving up?" "No," Calyx replied confidently. "There is a secret entrance to the vault right here. That's why I ordered the tent to be set up on this specific spot." With that said, Calyx walked to the center of the tent, and pressing a hidden mechanism in the floor, activated a secret passage that opened up. His men were stunned, watching the scene in disbelief. The prince, acting with unshakable confidence, had proven he was right. The entrance was right there, just as he had said, but no one could understand how he had discovered such a secret on his own. As Calyx prepared to enter, his men stopped him, warning him of the danger of entering such an unknown place without precaution. The prince argued that it was unlikely anything would happen, but they insisted on taking the lead. Intrigued, Kraut approached. "Young master, you seem to know a great deal about this dungeon. How did you obtain so much information?" "My source is reliable," Calyx replied without giving details. He then added in a resigned tone, "I understand that I am seen as weak and incompetent. It's only natural that everyone doubts my abilities." "That's not what I meant," Kraut hurried to say. Thomas, however, stepped forward and declared firmly, "I believe in the prince. A leader who values even the least of his soldiers is worthy of my trust." The other men agreed in unison, stating that if the cause was just, they would gladly follow the young master, even if it cost them their lives. Calyx looked away, confessing that he still felt weak, unable to use mana, and therefore unworthy of such loyalty. Thomas, however, comforted him, reminding him of one of the principles of knighthood. "Not all strength is physical, my lord. True strength comes from within." The words moved everyone, and Kraut, visibly emotional, couldn't hold back tears of pride for his comrades. Composing himself, Calyx took command. "We can't waste any more time. For the sake of the wounded and exhausted, we're going in now." His allies nodded and prepared to lead the exploration. As he watched them, a thought crossed the prince's mind. He hoped Lila was safe. Far away, Lila had just defeated one of the monsters known as Bigfoots. After collecting a blood sample from the creature, which she deemed sufficient for her purposes, she set fire to the carcass to eliminate any traces. Then, she climbed the tallest nearby tree to survey the terrain, predicting that the other monsters in the area would soon gather at the source of the smoke. From her vantage point, however, she noticed an even greater problem. On the ground, moving stealthily, were members of her own guild. Lila knew it was only a matter of time before they came for her, but she had no intention of being captured. If they were the hunters, she would strike first. Hooded figures were analyzing the Bigfoot's carcass, noting that the body had been completely disintegrated right after the kill. However, they didn't know the cause or who was responsible for the annihilation. The one leading the analysis suspected that only a nearby noble house could possess such power, concluding that he needed to inform Viscount Servio of the emergency at once. Meanwhile, from a distance, Lila observed the scene. She noticed the men were sealing hunting pouches, a method she recognized as the same one used by scouts to seal their reports. Using a refined technique to determine the wind's direction, she took the blood she had collected from the Bigfoot and dispersed it along the air current. Lila hid in a nearby tree, waiting for her plan to come to fruition. The strategy worked. The scent of blood, spread by the wind and amplified by the fire she had started, agitated the Bigfoot tribe. Fury took hold not only of the smaller members, but also of the pack's leader, an imposing albino Bigfoot. Enraged, he commanded the others on a relentless search for the one responsible. Back with the group of hunters, the leader concluded he needed to deliver his report to their chief as quickly as possible. Along the way, he carefully checked if he was being followed, aware that any unforeseen event could compromise his objective. However, his caution was useless. Even as a trained professional, he was caught by surprise when a blade pierced his back. Lila, acting with surgical precision, intercepted the messenger before he could complete his mission. As a precaution, she took the report and, upon reading its contents, wondered about the identity of the recipient. Elsewhere, the prince tried to process the discovery made inside the secret passage. Thomas explained that his men had only reached that point thanks to a magic crystal ball they had obtained. The prince reflected on the extraordinary situation. Even if the chamber's magical protections had weakened over time, access shouldn't have been so simple. When questioned, Thomas revealed that Marquis Antonio is the Viscount currently serving in the region. He reported finding precious stones, crystals, and herbs, commonly used in arcane experiments, as well as several enchanted artifacts. Although none of the items were particularly valuable, their presence indicated that the place was frequented by a mage. The prince, however, felt that something of great value was hidden, beyond the reach of ordinary eyes. His attention turned to an empty space in the chamber, sensing that he would find what he was looking for there. However, Kraut stopped him from proceeding, claiming it was impossible to know what kind of dangers awaited them. He insisted that a thorough investigation was necessary before they advanced. Frustrated, the prince knew he wouldn't be able to convince his ally otherwise and finally authorized Kraut to proceed with the investigation. After a detailed search for clues, Kraut located a switch that activated a secret door. The prince's eyes sparkled in anticipation, as this was exactly what he had hoped to find. Upon entering the area, Kraut commented that despite having thoroughly investigated the ruins foundation, he had never noticed this secret space. Calyx, however, clarified that the place was a facade, an illusory structure designed to hide a greater secret. He revealed that in ancient times, it was common practice to build fake facilities around tombs or mages' laboratories to mislead intruders and thieves. Kraut understood. This was just one of many hidden spaces, and the expedition's final destination was near. The prospect of finally obtaining what the final chamber hid made him visibly enthusiastic. The prince explained that to open the correct passage, one had to mentally project the desired function into the crystal ball. As he watched Calyx handle the artifacts with remarkable skill, An unusual noise startled Kraut. A new door had materialized, and he rushed toward it. However, Calyx warned him, explaining that this door led to a fake chamber and that they couldn't be hasty. Caution was essential, as operating a device like this could open several false doors as a security mechanism before the real one was revealed. Continuing the process, the prince finally found a door that hadn't appeared before, concluding that this must be the correct one. Upon entering, Kraut realized the truth behind it all. This was the method the owners of the place used to mine without raising suspicion, which explained why they were never discovered. Calyx noted there was no sign of people, suggesting that the mining occurred at specific times. This was fortunate, as an unexpected encounter with the miners would have caused serious problems. For now, the prince's objective was clear: to ensure the permanent end of this operation. To do so, he needed to deactivate the key in the crystal ball. Preventing others from accessing it, combined with the destruction of the gate, would make the clandestine mining impossible. Calyx considered it a fine parting gift. He instructed Kraut and the others to collect all the silver they could find in the chamber, and, when they were finished, to leave the scroll he had prepared. His ally hesitated, reluctant to leave him alone, but the prince reassured him, stating that the entire area had already been inspected and was safe. Understanding the order, Kraut nodded and promised to return as quickly as possible. As soon as the general left, the prince celebrated internally for finally being alone. He walked over to a nearby wall, remembering a secret that only he knew. Thanks to his prior knowledge of the game, he knew all the details, but seeing such an item with his own eyes was a completely different experience from observing it on a screen. There, hidden away, he found Priston's bracelet, an artifact that protected its wearer with a magical barrier against any fatal attack. For someone with low combat power, this item was the equivalent of a second life. With the bracelet on his wrist, he felt immensely safer. Before leaving, something else in the bracelet's chamber caught his attention: a glistening black inscription. The language was unknown and he couldn't decipher it. However, one name stood out: Hecatoria. He recognized it immediately, for it was the name of the goddess who, according to legend, taught magic to the humans of the continent. In his previous playthroughs, he had never encountered anything like this, and he wondered if it had some connection to his reincarnation. Driven by curiosity, he touched the writing. Instantly, a portal activated, pulling him into a dark dimension. In that void, he encountered something completely unexpected. Not understanding what it was, he assumed it had to be related to the aforementioned deity. Suddenly, the divine entity manifested, and a piercing headache struck the prince. Voices began to echo in his mind. Before him, the image of Hecatoria appeared, protesting, "This is inhuman." Another voice, cold and imposing, replied that there were no humans there. The voice continued, stating that the decision had been made by a majority vote, and that Hecatoria should not oppose the pact they had forged. "This is violence," she retorted, indignant. "I cannot agree to this." The voice lamented her stance. "If you wish so much to be like humans, then your wish shall be granted." In that instant, Hecatoria was struck by an immeasurable power. The protagonist watched it all, paralyzed. But the worst part wasn't the sight, but the terrifying sound that accompanied it. Hecatoria's screams as her powers were ripped from her. It was a sound so shocking he felt he couldn't bear it for much longer. For her audacity, Hecatoria was stripped of her powers, and the mysterious voice also revoked her divinity. It decreed that from that moment on, she would become an object of hatred and contempt, even to the humans she so loved. The entity believed it would be these same humans who would put an end to her newly acquired mortal life, and it eagerly awaited that day. Shaken, the prince managed to return to the real plane, still deeply shocked by the vision he had witnessed. However, what surprised him most was the notification in his system window. He had acquired an authority-level skill. By touching the inscription, he had obtained a fragment of Hecatoria's first authority. The prince knew that skills were usually classified from rank F to S, but this one was different. It was a power that only gods or demigods could wield. After all, it was the very essence of the divine entity it came from, and the only way to achieve such a class was by acquiring an authority. According to the system, his own rank had been raised. From this, he concluded that the goddess Hecatoria was the one responsible for bringing him to this world. Moreover, a skill of this magnitude was capable of harming even a divine being. The prince then wondered, was it his duty to take revenge on the other gods on Hecatoria's behalf? He began to laugh, pondering if that wasn't the ultimate goal of the game. Although he hated being manipulated, he was determined to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. Just then, Kraut approached and announced they had finished their work. He then led the prince to inspect what they had found, and the young man was dazzled by the sight of so much wealth. The estimate was roughly 30,000 gold coins, far more than they had expected. Kraut added that they had also found silver bars, which could be worth up to 100,000 gold coins. However, he noted that transporting it all with their weakened soldiers would not be an easy task. For the prince, however, this was not a problem. He had unlocked his inventory inventory during the fight with the goblin and was confident he could use it to store all the boxes. So he ordered Kraut to gather all the treasure in one place. A short time later, with the loot organized, the prince instructed his ally to prepare the men for the journey back. "And what about the boxes, my lord? What shall we do with them?" Kraut asked. The prince thought for a moment. The NPCs weren't aware that this was a game. They would never understand the concept of an inventory. However, as a prince, he didn't need to give detailed explanations, just a convincing excuse. "While you were moving the boxes, I found this magic bracelet. I will use this item to store the treasure." His ally was visibly shocked by the revelation. "Keep this a secret," the prince ordered. Kraut understood immediately. Such a valuable item needed to be protected. "I will stand guard while you store the boxes, my lord." Then, the prince activated his system and opened the inventory. Just like in a game, he began transferring the items into the storage space. Unsure of its maximum capacity, he tested the limits little by little. To his surprise, he managed to store all the loot without any difficulty. Now he wouldn't have any financial problems for a long time. All that was left was to return home. Upon leaving the chamber, he regrouped with the soldiers. Kraut informed him that everything was ready for their departure. "Has Lila not returned yet?" the prince asked. "No, my lord. I fear she has fled and abandoned you." However, Calyx intervened, claiming it was no coincidence that the Bigfoots had fled earlier. Kraut then realized that Lila had not been idle during her absence. After Prince Calyx revealed the nature of Lila's mission, Kraut warned him, considering the endeavor too dangerous. Although he didn't have the best impression of the woman, he did not wish for her to die in such a way. Calyx explained that he had tried to include the general in his plan, but upon his refusal, he had been forced to act on his own. Kraut reflected that when he first heard the plan, he had judged the method to be too risky, but now he realized his mistake. The prince then declared that Lila's disappearance was a sign that something had gone wrong. Since the mission was only possible thanks to her, he felt it was his duty to return the favor and rescue her, asking if his soldiers would support him. At first, the soldiers were shocked, but since it was an order from their lord, refusal was unthinkable. The prince was surprised by their immediate enthusiasm, knowing he would have the necessary support. For his part, Kraut felt he had not been as helpful as he should have been, and as a knight, resolved to fulfill his duty to the best of his ability. The prince ordered Kraut to select the members for the search party, while the rest would wait in the cellar. In his thoughts, Calyx pondered the possibilities. Lila could have been captured by the Bigfoots or by the organization she belonged to. However, he dismissed the second hypothesis, as his pursuers would have no way of knowing about the secret mission. Capture by the Bigfoots seemed more likely. Besides, Lila was skilled at covering her tracks and wouldn't be careless enough to compromise everything. The real concern was how to actually find her. Kraut approached and asked where they were going. The prince replied that their destination was the Bigfoot leader. He handed some herbs to Kraut, instructing him to boil them and apply the resulting oil to their weapons. Calyx was emphatic, telling him not to ask too many questions and to just follow the plan, determined to find Lila no matter the cost. Sometime later, the group arrived at a cave. Calyx explained the strategy, stating that there should only be females inside, as the males were likely out hunting. The mission was to eliminate the ones in the nest first, then deal with the males and follow their tracks to Lila. He added that the fight wouldn't be like the last time, as their weapons were now poisoned. The group's approach was anything but subtle, and the monsters inside the cave soon heard the commotion. Noticing the creatures gathering, Calyx warned that they were approaching and ordered the soldiers to advance. As the battle began, he and Thomas moved away to search for Lila. Calyx believed she hadn't been defeated, but was merely hiding. Finding her was only a matter of time. The two began to follow the footprints they found around the area. Amidst the search, Thomas commented that Lila was very beautiful and asked if the prince liked her. Annoyed, Calyx immediately denied it, stating that the search had nothing to do with that. Despite the sharp reply, Thomas continued, saying he never would have imagined seeing Lila volunteer for such a risky mission. The prince explained that Lila was no fool. She realized that staying by his side was her best chance of survival, and that's why she was cooperating. Her urgency to survive forced her to consider all options. Internally, Calyx reflected on the future. The game's first continental event would be the invasion of the Jaburu Kingdom, and the mountain rangers would play a crucial role. He had always thought they were just volunteers, but now he suspected that a faction, like Viscount Servio's, was somehow involved with them. Meanwhile, Kraut and his men were completing their mission in the cave, defeating all the monsters. The general shouted that there was no time to rest, as they needed to regroup with the prince. Together, they set off to meet their leader. Kraut's respect for Calyx had grown even more, and he only hoped that both the prince and Lila were safe. In the midst of the search for his ally, Calyx's heart went cold as he found Lila lying on the ground, surrounded by wild beasts. While Thomas kept the creatures at bay, the prince rushed to help her, seeing the severity of her wound. He quickly pulled out an intermediate-level healing potion, hoping it would be enough. At least Lila was still breathing. Calyx knew the wound would heal gradually, but for that, she would need to ingest the entire contents of the vial. With Thomas's return after dispatching the monsters, the prince asked for his help. Together, they managed to position Lila to administer the potion. A sigh of relief escaped Calyx as he saw the elixir begin to take effect. At that moment, Kraut finally arrived at the scene, and the prince declared that the timing was perfect. A week later, in the courtyards of Count Shiken's castle, the prince dedicated himself to rigorous physical training. He had reached level 18, approaching the average combat level of an adult man, a remarkable feat for someone only 15 years old. Watching him, Russell commented on how the young master's stamina had increased significantly in such a short time, praising his robust physique. Kraut, in turn, noted that the prince seemed like a completely different person and suspected he was using some secret method to evolve. Little did they know that for Calyx, his journey to level up was just beginning, and he was not to be underestimated. Although Kraut was eager to begin swordsmanship training, Russell insisted they not rush things, as the priority was the full recovery of his body. At the end of the session, the prince announced he had business to attend to at the Magic Tower. His ally, Kraut, questioned the reason for the visit. Calyx simply replied that it was something important, and that he would prepare to go to the tower's branch. "You seem to trust the prince deeply," Russell observed. Kraut nodded thoughtfully. "I don't pretend to understand everything about him, but of one thing I am certain. My master is so talented that it's impossible to predict what his next skill will be. Moreover, he genuinely cares for his subordinates and the people of his domain. I can have no doubts about his integrity. In the beginning, my role was simply to look after the young master," Russell confessed. "But now, I find it difficult to keep up with his thoughts and actions. Even so, he needs someone to guide him. Your authority is still necessary," Kraut affirmed. The old advisor knew that the young master, at only 15 and without an official title, could only complete the succession ceremony upon reaching adulthood and an appropriate level. "After the previous count passed away, I was immensely worried about the future of our county," the soldier continued. "But now, I realize that someone worthy will take his place. After all, the prince is a lion just like his father." Sometime later, at the Shiken territory's Magic Tower branch, the prince and his ally were greeted by the person in charge. The woman seemed surprised to be faced with a boy of delicate features, accompanied by an imposing man. Not recognizing them, she broke into a smile. "Handsome men are always welcome," she said, inviting them in. Her attitude was quite different from what Calyx expected of a mage. Seated in a room, she served them tea using magic, making steam rise directly from the teapot. The display of power made the prince wonder if he was in the presence of a fifth-class mage in such a modest branch. The mage introduced herself as Rosen Dreamwalker, and noticing the astonishment on his face, asked, "Why are you so surprised?" "Honestly, I didn't expect to meet someone like you in such a rural area. Your gestures have a unique elegance," Calyx replied. Beside him, Kraut wondered if this woman was his young master's type. However, the prince's interest was purely professional. "It's almost impossible for someone to reach the 5th class before the age of 20, unless they are a direct disciple of the Magic Tower's master." Rosen seemed delighted by the compliment. "Despite my appearance, I'm already past 30. Being compared to a disciple of the Tower Master is a great honor." Feigning innocence, the prince insisted. "And what is the secret to such beauty?" "I just sleep well and wash my face often," she replied with a mysterious smile. After the brief conversation, Rosen's tone changed, becoming direct. "So, what is the reason for your visit?" Kraut noted the sudden shift to the main topic. Without beating around the bush, the prince answered, "I'm here to buy an explosion scroll." The surprise on Rosen's face was evident, but she quickly composed herself. "I see. A valuable customer indeed." Rosen explained that she would normally charge the standard price for the scroll. However, because she had taken a liking to Calyx, she offered a generous discount, reducing the price to just 500 gold coins. Calyx, concerned, questioned if she would get into trouble for offering such a low price. Rosen reassured him, stating that although the local magic tower was in poor condition, the authority of a branch director was indisputable anywhere. Given this, Calyx took the opportunity to make another request, a loan from the reserve fund. The proposal surprised Rosen, who asked how much he would need. 60,000 gold coins, Calyx replied without hesitation. Rosen pondered that the amount was considerably high. Calyx, however, promptly offered silver bars as collateral and promised to pay interest, assuring her that even though it was a short-term loan, it would be very advantageous for the tower. In his mind, Calyx laid out his strategy. He couldn't use the coins he stole from Gerard's vault to settle the debt, as that would expose his entire plan. The loan was the perfect way to launder the money. Besides, there was nowhere else he could get such a large amount, making it crucial to convince Rosen to agree to the deal. However, the mage hesitated, considering the request somewhat excessive. For a moment, Calyx feared he had acted too hastily, relying too much on her favor. Roseanne explained that the supervisor would certainly reject such a proposal, but she had a solution. "The central supervisors rarely visit us," she said in a conspiratorial tone. "If we agree to keep this a secret, I can grant the loan." She set the conditions. In addition to absolute secrecy, Calyx would have to repay the full amount within 6 months. Otherwise, the silver bars left as collateral would be sold to cover the debt. Under these terms, she was willing to proceed. Calyx smiled inwardly. It was exactly what he had hoped for. He knew that mages always needed funds for their research, and the interest on 60,000 gold coins would be an irresistible temptation for Roseanne. "I will be immensely grateful if you can grant me the loan," he declared, formally accepting the terms. With the deal sealed, the debt to Gerard was, for all intents and purposes, settled. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Gerard was requesting a map from one of his subordinates. His fury was palpable, fueled by the news that one of the patrols assigned to inspect the secret vault had disappeared. Analyzing the map, he located the last clues left by the group and realized that the conventional trail through the mountain would take more than a day to reach the vault, but a direct route could be covered in less than 24 hours. This realization only intensified his rage. "Prepare yourselves. We march to the Gourd Highlands immediately," he ordered. Sometime later, while on their way, the party was suddenly stopped by a colossal figure, a stone golem. Panic broke out among the soldiers. "Stone golems are large, but their movements are slow. We can attack from a safe distance," one of the men shouted. Confident that the enemy was too large to dodge, they advanced in a coordinated charge. However, the golem was no passive target. It moved first with surprising speed, and the soldiers didn't stand a chance. "The knights were cut down so easily," a soldier murmured, despair creeping into his voice. "Our fate will be no different." His grim prediction came true the very next moment. The golem turned to him and, with a single blow, turned him into an unrecognizable pulp. A nearby companion, who had narrowly escaped, froze in shock as he witnessed the brutal scene. "Hold the formation!" an officer shouted from a distance. Ironically, the man trying to restore order became the golem's next target. A single, devastating blow silenced him forever. The lower-ranking soldiers watched, stunned, as their superiors were annihilated one by one. The break in morale was fatal, and soon they too were eliminated, all under the cold, impassive gaze of Gerard. The golem's sudden appearance wasn't natural, and the group's mage confirmed their suspicions. There must be another mage nearby controlling this creature, and to animate a golem of this size, he would need to be at the very least a 5th-class mage. In the face of the massacre, the army commander approached Gerard. "We're being decimated. I suggest a strategic retreat to regroup." Gerard, however, dismissed the idea with contempt. "Retreat is out of the question. The tribute to the Marquis must be sent in 3 days, without fail. Clear this path in 24 hours. I don't care how many of you are left behind." Back at the magic tower, Calyx asked casually, "By now, my gift should have been delivered, shouldn't it?" Roseanne smiled, curious. "A gift for a girlfriend, perhaps?" "No, that's not the case," Calyx replied. "Who knows? Maybe one day I'll get a gift from you too," she replied with a sparkle in her eyes. What they didn't know was that just outside the tower, Lila was listening to their entire conversation. A suspicious question formed in her mind. Was that woman trying to seduce the prince? A short time later, Kraut entered the tower to report that all their luggage had been properly stored in the magic tower. Meanwhile, Lila watched the scene, visibly annoyed by her jealousy. The prince, in turn, thanked him for completing the task. Calyx handed a small box to Roseanne and asked his companions to wait outside for a moment. They both obeyed promptly. Once outside, Lila couldn't hold back. "Why is the prince trying so hard to please that mage?" Kraut, however, simply replied that he wasn't supposed to say anything more than what was strictly necessary. Inside the tower, Roseanne opened the gift, and her eyes sparkled upon seeing a stunning necklace. "Can I really keep something so precious?" she asked, enchanted. Calyx explained that it was a token of his gratitude for the preparation funds she had provided. Roseanne reminded him to keep his word and maintain their secret agreement, since the transaction hadn't been officially documented. However, Calyx suspected this was just a pretext. In his mind, the real reason was that the mage didn't want the loan's interest paid to the central tower, but directly to her instead. In any case, he assured her he would keep the secret. Satisfied, Roseanne commented that business like this was always welcome and that, moreover, the prince's presence had boosted the sales of scrolls. "By the way," she added with a curious look, "are you planning to go to war with so many explosion scrolls?" Calyx noted the mage's perceptiveness. It was no wonder she held the position of branch chief. Her skill at extracting information was remarkable. To deflect the question, he vehemently denied it. "I would never do such a thing. I'm just replenishing my stock of explosives, since I used up everything I had on my last mining excavation." "You really use such expensive scrolls just to dig holes?" Rosen insisted, skeptical. Calyx smiled enigmatically and said he would leave that topic for their next conversation, since they would be meeting more often from now on. I'll look forward to it, she replied. Upon leaving the tower, a sense of relief washed over the prince. He had gotten what he wanted, and his territory's enormous debt was finally settled. Now, his only concern was Gerard's reaction upon discovering he had been robbed. Calyx reflected on how, in the past, under Selvio's influence, he had been nothing more than a weed on the side of the road. But the order to eliminate him had failed, and now he was back, seeking revenge against all those responsible. His plan was to catch them by surprise, and he wouldn't rest until his retaliation was complete. Far away, Gerard's group was struggling to contain a colossal golem. Using heavy chains and metal stakes, they tried to immobilize the monster, looking for an opening to expose its vulnerable core. The strategy was clear: destroy the core to bring the creature down. Finally, one of the men managed to land a direct hit, causing a massive explosion that, while successful, claimed the lives of several soldiers in the process. We've defeated all the golems on the path, sir, but most of the team is either dead or seriously injured, the soldier's leader reported. Ignoring the losses, Gerard ordered coldly, "Open the vault gates." A mage stepped forward, preparing a crystal ball that served as a key, and handed it to his master. However, upon trying to use the sphere, a metallic voice echoed from the gate. "Unauthorized user detected. Activating countermeasure protocol. Step away immediately, or you will be eliminated." Startled, Gerard tried again, wondering what could be happening. But all his attempts were in vain. Access was repeatedly denied. "Master, we must fall back before the countdown ends. Then we can try again safely," the mage warned. The group ran away from the entrance, but the system's voice sounded once more. "Interception program activated. Dispatching containment units to eliminate intruders within the designated range." Back with Calyx's group, during the return journey, he finally asked Lila about her bad mood. The girl confessed that it all started when he showed so much affection for the mage from the tower. The prince, however, assured her there were no ulterior motives. "I was there strictly on business," he clarified. Changing the subject completely, Calyx posed an unexpected question. "What do you think would happen if Selvio were betrayed?" Lila seemed confused. "Why would anyone do that? The Viscount is not the forgiving type. He's a strict perfectionist who doesn't tolerate failure under any circumstances," Calyx countered. "But do you think someone like Gerard would meekly accept his own death, even if it were an order from the Viscount?" Lila pondered and agreed. "If Gerard finds out he's been deceived, he'll certainly do anything to survive. He wouldn't hesitate to betray the Viscount if necessary." "Exactly. Gerard wouldn't let himself be taken down so easily," the prince concluded. Silently, Lila watched his expression and realized that once again, Calyx was planning something on his own. An uncomfortable feeling of being left out began to grow inside her. Meanwhile, on the Golda Plateau, one of Gerard's allies reported that while they had successfully exterminated the monsters with the support they received, their own troops had been nearly wiped out in the process. Furious, Gerard ordered the creation of a new army, but the immediate priority was to open the vault door. He concluded that the only way in was to blow the door open with a magic scroll, even if it caused considerable destruction to the site. A short time later, the entrance was blown to pieces. However, upon entering the ruins, a bad feeling washed over Gerard. After a short walk, they reached the place that was supposed to house the treasure, only to find it completely empty. Gerard ordered his men to search everywhere. Instead of gold and silver, they found only scrolls. One of the soldiers discovered in the worst way possible that they were explosive scrolls. The detonation of one triggered a chain reaction, resulting in a massive explosion that decimated the remaining shadow allies. Terrified, Gerard realized the explosion had triggered a magic trap, causing the structure to collapse and crush everyone inside. He immediately concluded that, at this rate, the Viscount would eliminate them for their disobedience. In desperation, he announced it was time to activate the emergency plan. One of his men, though frightened, knew what needed to be done. Gerard approached the group's mage, expressing false gratitude. The next moment, the mage was stabbed in the back by one of the soldiers. "You're not to blame for anything," Gerard said coldly. "You just had bad luck. To keep the secret, I had no other choice." After the deed, one of his men warned him that Cape wouldn't remain silent. He had probably already sensed something was amiss and would be investigating the ruins himself. Gerard agreed, treating the situation as a mere side effect, and stated that they needed to see the emergency plan through to the end. Sometime later, in Viscount Selvio's village, Gerard presented himself before him. Selvio heard the report that the treasure entrusted to Gerard had been stolen. Aware of the gravity of his failure, Gerard fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness. "I don't want to hear excuses," Selvio retorted sharply. Results are all that matter. What happened to the silver I stored? Gerard promptly blamed tomb raiders, claiming they had dug an underground passage through the ancient ruins. He alleged that, in the process, the thieves had likely triggered the security system by accident, which prevented them from taking everything, leaving most of the silver behind. He argued that few would be able to carry heavy boxes through such narrow underground passages. To find those responsible, Gerard claimed to have secretly offered a reward to precious metal dealers, in addition to having other strategies in motion. With this, he was confident that sooner or later, he would recover the treasure. Furthermore, he believed the thieves would try to steal what was left, but this time, he would be waiting for them. After all, someone who steals once feels confident enough to try again, especially when it comes to such a valuable haul. The Viscount seemed satisfied with the plan, and Gerard thought his smooth talking was working. The idea of pressuring the thieves until some information leaks out is excellent, said Selvio. However, you will still be punished. The Viscount's response came in the form of violent lashes from a whip. As he whipped him, Selvio unleashed all his fury, blaming Gerard for everything that had happened. He revealed that he knew Gerard had always considered the commander of the Shadow Forces his enemy, and that the army trained for so long had become useless because of his actions, with more than half of the men now out of commission. The Viscount declared he didn't care about petty squabbles, but if they affected the great cause, it was his duty to intervene. With that, he announced that Gerard would be removed from the command of the Dark Forces, and from now on, would only act with his express permission. Furthermore, the Viscount brought up the tribute to be sent to Marquis Antonio. He ordered Gerard to go to the Shekin territory and collect the deed to the land as payment for their debt. If they offer a lesser amount, use it to cover what's missing from the tribute, and if they have to sell their commercial assets to settle the rest, so be it. Gerard cursed his luck. This was the wealth he had planned to take for himself, and now he would have to hand it all over to the Viscount. Despite everything, Selvios made it clear that Gerard was not yet forgiven. You know full well what will happen if you don't find the stolen silver. Gerard nodded, affirming he understood, and prepared to leave. As he left the Viscount's chambers, one of his servants handed Gerard a potion to speed up his recovery. While he drank it, the servant tried to hide his own injuries, but Gerard insisted he also use the elixir, and questioned Jacob's whereabouts. The servant reported that he had gotten rid of Jacob, deeming him useless for their purposes, but revealed he had found a possible replacement, a boy from the desert with emerald eyes and brown hair, whose appearance resembled that of Prince Calyx. Gerard admitted his aversion to dark-skinned people, but considered that he could tolerate him for now. He then asked about the progress of the preparations. The servant confirmed that everything would be ready in 3 days, although the executives were making the process difficult. Gerard smiled. More than half of the Shadow Squad was out of commission, while the rest were busy hunting non-existent tomb raiders. This was the perfect opportunity for his plan to succeed. He ordered the servant to go to Count Shaken's estate and seize any object of value. The more money they had to rebuild their lives after their escape, the better. The servant reflected, remembering how that man had thwarted the Shaken family's succession battle against Prince Calyx. Would it really be so easy this time? A few days later, in the Shaken territory, Kraut announced Gerard's arrival for another visit, this time to address the matter of the debt. Russell remarked that everything was happening exactly as the prince had foreseen and instructed Kraut to accompany Calyx during the meeting. Although Kraut felt like a hindrance, Russell assured him that his only role was to support his master. Shortly after, Prince Calyx went to meet Gerard, who commented on the improvement in his physique. Calyx, however, cut the conversation short. I can do without the pleasantries. Your rude attitude has already exhausted my patience, so get straight to the point. In that case, I'll be direct, Gerard replied. I am here to carry out an official seizure. It has been determined that this territory owes 60,000 in gold and has no means to pay. Therefore, I will confiscate all necessary items to secure payment of the debt. And what happens if I refuse? The prince asked. Then I will assign a senior officer to ensure you do not escape, and you will be placed under constant surveillance. Kraut intervened in the prince's defense, declaring he would not allow such a thing. Gerard, however, warned him, violence will only worsen your situation. My judgment is crucial when it comes to recovering funds. If that's the case, Calyx said with a calculated tone, then surely there is room to postpone the payment under the right circumstances. Gerard smiled. The young man's sharp mind was surprisingly direct. He admitted that they could come to an agreement. The prince realized the truth. Gerard was so desperate he was willing to accept a bribe. The fact that he had come to collect the debt so soon only confirmed his suspicions. With his own funds stolen, he was trying to recover the lost amount by any means necessary, betting that the territory would be unable to pay. I have gathered the necessary funds, Calyx announced to Gerard's astonishment. I will pay the full amount. How is that possible? Why the surprise? After all, this is a good thing. Calyx revealed several bearer bonds, issued by the Royal Chamber of Commerce. Gerard examined them and confirmed their authenticity, perplexed as to how the prince had obtained them in such a short time. He pondered that, unlike gold and silver, these bonds were light and easy to transport. If he took them and fled, he could escape any punishment from the Viscount and even go into exile in a foreign country. At that moment, the prince placed a gleaming silver bar on the table. Would you like to verify it? I have 32 more pieces like this, in 420 boxes. Gerard's blood ran cold. The prince was openly revealing himself as the thief of the Viscount's treasure. Was his plan to report him to Selvios? Was it possible he had known everything from the beginning? Gerard wondered if he was even facing a human being. If Viscount Selvios found out, it would be the end of him. When the rumors began to spread, Viscount Selvios fled with his secret funds. Calyx continued, relentless. You will be held responsible for the disappearance of these bars. Therefore, you have two choices. Betray the Viscount and flee, or take responsibility for your mistakes and face severe punishment. Seeing Gerard's shock, the prince decided to offer him a glimmer of hope. I will help you survive during your escape. Are you interested? Kraut watched, trying to decipher what his master was planning. It's not enough to just escape this territory, Gerard argued, his voice trembling. I will prepare support so solid that no one will be able to touch you. Why are you doing this? I am facing one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. That is why I want to help you. Right now, I need security greater than that of a prince. Can you give me that? Yes, Calyx confirmed, but everything has a price. He extended a document to Gerard, stating it was his safe passage. It was a receipt, attesting that the Shikan County had paid its entire debt with bearer bonds issued by the royal family. Gerard finally understood. Prince Calyx was truly terrifying. He had deceived everyone, pretending to be a fool and naive all this time. In that instant, Gerard knew it was better not to have him as an enemy, and agreed to sign the document. Before, he had seen only a frail boy. Now, he understood he was dealing with someone far beyond his capabilities. Gerard inquired what, exactly, he needed to do. In response, Calyx handed the signed contract to Kraut, announcing that he would be leaving for the capital. A short time later, Gerard took his leave and began his journey. Faced with the situation, Calyx explained that he would need help, and that the most influential person for his plans was His Majesty's first son, Prince Gale. Kraut presumed the prince was giving up the shield he relied on, but Calyx denied it, assuring him that the plan remained unchanged. He added that he had made an excellent deal for 60,000 gold coins, but that the real issue wasn't the money. With an enigmatic tone, he concluded that Kraut would understand everything later. Sometime later, Viscount Selvios' chief of staff came forward to report a series of urgent events. He informed him that all the top executives of the Myrthus Trading Company had vanished. Although the main assets were still on the books, they had already been sold. Immediately, another reporter appeared, breathless, announcing that the Myrthus headquarters had been overrun by debt collectors, who were causing a huge commotion. The bad news continued. The dark forces had awakened. Furthermore, several instructors from the fortress on the Golda Plateau had disappeared, adding to those who had already been found dead. After the reports, a palpable tension filled the room. Breaking the tense silence, Cape entered the room. Forgive the intrusion, my lord, but some dissatisfied soldiers have joined the movement and deserted. The Viscount looked up. Where did they go? They all headed to Shekin County, Cape replied. A week ago, the Count's security forces attacked Gerard and his group. However, when I checked the underground prison, I didn't find him. Due to hostile relations with the Shikan territory, our trackers were unable to advance. Selvios wondered why Gerard would go to the Shikan territory of all places. He wouldn't be foolish enough to attempt such an obvious escape. However, the possibility began to form in his mind. Chief of Staff, the Viscount ordered, send someone to the fortress on the Golda Plateau immediately. Keep this under absolute secrecy. This information cannot leak. And check if the boxes with the silver bars are still there. My lord, as far as we know, the mine collapsed and everything is buried. I don't know how we could confirm that. Find a way, Selvios retorted, unyielding. Even if you have to dig with your own hands. Turning to the other subordinate, he continued, Gale, from now on you are the squad leader. Bring the trackers back. I don't want to compromise our spy's cover for a fugitive who is probably long gone. However, we will not stop the search. Send a boat to monitor the Aran River. If no one appears in the next 2 weeks, it's likely they haven't tried to leave the kingdom. That way, we'll still have a chance to capture them someday. Lastly, prepare to meet with Marcus Antonio. Sometime later at Marquis Antonio's castle, the host remarked with a wry smile, It seems even perfectionists like you, Selvios, fail from time to time. It's nothing serious, the Viscount replied, downplaying the situation. Only one of the bases I established has vanished. Since that incident, things haven't been going well. Perhaps we were too hasty. Nevertheless, Selvios countered, it was an excellent opportunity to eliminate the promising Count Colin Shikan, who was about to reach Class 7. Someone like him could not be allowed to stand by the king's side, as he would upset the balance of power. It's a decision we cannot go back on. The crown's agents will find whoever is responsible for stealing my silver. And what will we do about the arrogant Shekins? Antonio asked. Should we declare war? Perhaps diplomacy would be more effective, Selvios mused. I've checked the information and confirmed that the Shekin territory has not yet replaced its representative on the Council of Nobles. The current one, Tigre, is our ally. We can use him before they appoint a replacement. Meanwhile, Calix was analyzing the situation with Kraut. Viscount Selvios will likely resort to diplomatic means. By now, he must know about Gerard's betrayal, and possibly that I helped him escape. But instead of war, he'll choose diplomacy. It's a more cost-effective solution. What kind of strategy will they use? Kraut asked. Outside of war, feudal lords rarely leave their castles. Therefore, they clash in the capital's political arena through representatives who defend their interests. The Council of Nobles exists for that very reason, Kraut concluded. Should we send a representative there? Do you have anyone in mind? Orsil Tigrim would be the obvious choice, but he is Miss Stella's closest aide. Despite the gravity of the situation, Kraut noticed the prince's calm demeanor and wondered if he hadn't already planned everything in advance. To his surprise, Calix smiled. It's better to leave some openings for your enemies. Acting with perfection at all times drives your adversaries to desperation, making them recklessly search for any weakness. And that is the moment we can be caught by surprise. The city of Elsenia, with a 500-year history, was the capital of the Rourke Kingdom. Home to 250,000 people, it was the nation's beating heart and the city where the castle of King Clivio Karkow was located. And at that very moment, the king was about to begin his morning court session. What is the first topic of the day? One of the royal advisors announced the first item on the agenda, the succession of Shekin County. The king expressed his sorrow. The death of Count Shekin was an immeasurable loss. However, the county needs a leader. Is their representative present? Immediately, Orsil Tigrim was announced as the county's spokesman. Inform me of the details, the king ordered. Tigrim bowed and began his report, stating that the county was facing a delicate situation. It pains me to report this, Your Majesty, but Calix Shekin, the late count's firstborn son, has usurped power through military force. He falsely accused the count's widow of attempted murder in order to imprison her, and furthermore has permanently sealed his half-brother's mana flow. The king showed surprise. That is unusual indeed. The prince has attempted to take his own life in the past, Tigrim continued. He is mentally unstable, which makes him dangerously unpredictable. As he listened, the king reflected in silence. This man shouldn't underestimate him. With 30 years of experience in courtly intrigue, he could smell a farce. The king suspected that the sudden death of his loyal right-hand man, Count Colin Shekin, had not been natural. Now, Viscount Kosselin, a member of the aristocratic faction, was maneuvering to take the title. All of this, paradoxically, made the king sympathize with the young Calix, even without ever having met him. If the prince seized power by force, he must have had the support of his territory's army, the king mused aloud. And I refuse to believe that an army of knights would follow the orders of a madman. Orsil Tigrim was left speechless by the monarch's retort. It was then that Marquis Antonio intervened. Even if the prince is not mad, Your Majesty, he has accused someone of a serious crime without a proper trial. Furthermore, he sealed the power of a potential heir, incapacitating him forever. I ask that Your Majesty summon Calix to the capital so the House of Lords can assess his physical and mental health. The king thought the House of Lords was not trustworthy in the slightest, but he agreed to the summons. Prince Calix will be summoned. However, the investigation will be conducted by the Royal Palace's administrative department. The House of Lords may send a witness. After the meeting ended, Antonio turned to Viscount Selvios. Do you have anything to say? We have a big problem on our hands, the Viscount replied. The king is protecting that brat, Antonio growled. Apparently, the king is displeased that Shekin County is under our influence, but I don't see that as an insurmountable obstacle, said Selvios. And how do you intend to solve that? The Marquis asked. Become the king's father-in-law, Antonio reacted with surprise. The solution is to give my daughter to an old man on the brink of death? It wasn't the idea of using his daughter that bothered him, but rather wasting such a valuable card on a short-lived alliance. I'm not referring to the current king, Selvios clarified, but to his successor. And with any luck, we can arrange that within the next 5 years. The Marquis smiled at the audacity of the plan. And how exactly do you intend to replace the king? A few days later, in Shekin County, Calix received a letter. Kraut, his ally, informed him it was a message from the king himself and got straight to the point. The prince has been summoned to answer for the accusations made against you. What accusations? Calix asked. It is suspected that the prince is not of sound mind. You must prove your sanity before a jury. Calix began to laugh at the situation. There's no reason to waste time on this. I'll ask Russell to come up with a good excuse. Prince, are you really going to defy a direct order from the king? Kraut asked, concerned. I will not move just because the king has requested my presence, Calix declared. At this point, my enemies are surely expecting me to leave the castle so they can set an ambush. Leaving now would be walking straight into danger and giving them exactly what they want. I don't believe they would dare attack the prince in broad daylight, but if they did, I would lay down my life to stop them. I don't need protection, as I will not be leaving this place, Calyx stated. Instead, I will send someone to the capital to represent me, and I have the perfect person in mind. Is the prince referring to Gerard? Kraut asked. 2 weeks later, in the royal capital, Marquis Antonio was complaining to the king. Even after being summoned, Prince Shaken has been offering excuses instead of appearing. I suspect he is planning something. And what kind of plan could he have? The king inquired, impassive. Calyx sealed his half-brother's mana flow for no plausible reason. He must be afraid of being punished. And what does the Marquis suggest should be done? I will go to Shikan County myself to investigate the prince's situation, Antonio offered. The king authorized the Marquis's journey. Next, his servant prepared to announce the next topic of the meeting. However, upon reading the next item on the agenda, his expression transformed into pure astonishment. The king's herald announces that the next topic on the agenda is the engagement of the fifth prince, CL. The announcement is met with immediate surprise, especially from Duke Ottomore, who is the first to show his astonishment. The king declares that to his knowledge, Marquis Antonio's daughter is an intelligent and beautiful young woman, and therefore, he consents to her marriage with Prince CL. Marquis Antonio promptly expresses that such a union would be an immense honor for his family. However, Duke Ottomore vehemently disagrees, arguing that tradition dictates that the prince's brides be chosen from among the ladies who serve the queen. He points out that these women are selected for their exceptional skills, cultivated over years of interaction with the noblest families. As he listens to the protest, Antonio reflects, satisfied, that his maneuver has caught everyone by surprise. The king, in turn, addresses the duke. Are you implying that Marquis Antonio's daughter is inferior to any other candidate? He questions, his voice firm. He then reprimands him, reminding him that royal marriages are decisions made by the king and queen, and it is not the nobility's place to interfere. Although aware of this, Duke Ottomore feels that this is not right, but he has no power to oppose the royal decision. He and the moralist faction support the first prince, but the fifth prince is the current queen's biological son. The conclusion is inevitable. The king intends to name his fifth son as successor to the throne, over the firstborn. This means the moralist faction has been abandoned by the monarch, and the very foundation of the factions is beginning to crumble. Amidst the tension, the first prince enters the meeting room, announcing he has an urgent matter to discuss. The prince was not summoned to this meeting, the king warns. Leave at once. I will not leave until your majesty hears what I have to say, the prince replies firmly. Faced with this refusal, the king questions if his authority is being challenged. The prince denies it, but the king insists that by refusing to leave, he is disobeying a direct order. The monarch makes it clear that he will not allow any interference in Prince CL's marriage. However, the first prince states he has no intention of meddling in his brother's engagement. He claims to have found crucial information on a completely different matter, which must be communicated to both the king and the nobles present. And what is it about? The king inquires, his curiosity overcoming his irritation. The prince reveals that Russell Nigel, the government representative of Shikan County, has sent a letter. Upon hearing the name, the king questions why the prince is bringing up a matter that was already considered resolved. Duke Ottomore intervenes, claiming that the issue still has loose ends, and that the letter could help to better understand the situation in the Shikan territory. He emphasizes the concern over the silence from the region, which makes the correspondence of utmost importance. Furthermore, the Duke points out that Marquis Antonio, appointed to lead the investigation, is the Lord of Viscount Selvios, one of the involved parties. Irritated, Antonio asks, "Is the Duke implying that I am not trustworthy?" "I am merely saying that it is biased to appoint one of the involved parties as the mediator," Ottomore replies calmly. "And how can we trust this Viscount Russell?" Antonio countered. "From what I know, he has ties to Prince Calyx and could be an accomplice in his alleged crimes." Duke Ottomore passionately defended Russell, describing him as the former leader of the Blue Lions, an honorable swordmaster known for his unwavering chivalry and revulsion for injustice. He reminded everyone that Russell had been awarded the Royal Order of Honor, and it would be unthinkable for a man with such titles to send a letter containing falsehoods. After all, in a country known as the Land of Knights, if a national hero's word could not be trusted, then no authority could be. Does the Duke no longer trust his own country's administration? Antonio taunted, exasperated. The king interrupted the discussion, conceding that Duke Ottomore had a valid point. Intimidated, Antonio backed down, stating that he was not doubting Russell's credibility. With that, the king authorized the letter to be read and asked the prince to read it aloud for all to hear. The prince began to read. In the letter, Russell Nigel reported that there had been an assassination attempt on Prince Calyx's life. He detailed that Prince Grambine, in an attempt to escape severe punishment, had closed his own mana cycle. Russell wrote that all punishments were carried out in his name, with the consent of the other knights. He sent the report to the king and the Chamber of Lords so that no doubts would remain about what had occurred in his county. After the reading, a lord approached the prince to verify the document. It was Marquis Souvenir, known as the Sword of the Kingdom for representing the country's military strength. He claimed to have served alongside Russell in the Royal Guard and to be familiar with his signature. Souvenir, who recognized Russell as a great ally and a true knight, examined the letter and confirmed its authenticity, immediately seeing through Antonio's attempts to distort the facts. Antonio felt the walls closing in around him. His plan to dismantle the moralist faction and marry his daughter to the heir to the throne was about to be ruined by Souvenir's involvement. However, the first prince's appearance at that exact moment made him the new center of attention. This completely changed the power landscape, as the first prince's factions were direct adversaries of Prince Ciel's allies, a rivalry he might be able to exploit. To escape the situation, however, he first needed to resolve the matter of Shikan County. "I do not doubt Viscount Russell's word," Antonio said, changing his tactic. However, Prince Grambine's involvement in the assassination attempt was based solely on the attacker's testimony. It would be prudent to conduct an investigation to obtain concrete evidence. "Leaving the Count's title vacant is not a viable option," Ottomore retorted. "Prince Calix is only 15 years old," Antonio argued. "I've heard he doesn't even possess the basic skills to become a knight. To begin with, he should at least become a sword master." Ottomore considered the suggestion absurd, reminding him that Marquis Antonio himself had only achieved such a feat at the age of 50. "The requirement is high, I agree," Antonio admitted with a cunning smile. "However, to inherit a noble title, the young man must, at the very least, ascend to the level of a mana user to prove his potential. At only 15, it would take Calix 3 to 4 years to become a Class 4 user." Ottomore considered the time frame long, but was reassured by the fact that his rivals did not seem inclined to start an imminent war, especially with the preparations for the royal wedding, which would likely delay any conflict even further. Before the court, the king announced his decision. A special team would be formed to investigate the plot against Prince Calix, and if they found conclusive evidence, disciplinary measures would be taken. However, the investigation would only last until Calix achieved the status of a Class 4 user. If the prince reached that level before the inquiry was concluded, the team would be dissolved, and he would be allowed to succeed to the county of Shikan. Antonio publicly praised the king's wise decision, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He considered Ottomore a fool for believing Calix was capable of such a feat, imagining that the frail young man would never reach that level. The decision, which seemed fair on the surface, actually favored his own plans. Antonio anticipated, with satisfaction, Ottomore's fury upon discovering he had been deceived. The Shikan family had always been a thorn in his side, and now he finally saw a way to subjugate them. That night in his chambers, Marquis Antonio summoned Lanciano, deciding that his intelligence agency, Variegata, was the most suitable to handle the matter. Upon presenting himself, Lanciano was given a task with the strict condition that Viscount Selvios was to know nothing of it. Lanciano hesitated, arguing that the Viscount was too cunning to be easily deceived, but difficulty was not an excuse for refusal. Noticing the Marquise's foul mood, he listened to the order. Use one of the Dark Knights, just like last time, to resolve the issue without getting his own hands dirty. Understanding, Lanciano promised to arrange everything. That same night, in Prince Gale's castle, the atmosphere was one of celebration. Standing before Gerard, Gale gave him full credit for their recent success. "The moment the royalist faction was abandoned, you stepped in and united everyone. No one else could have executed such a bold plan." Gerard, for his part, could hardly believe what had happened, aware that the true architect of it all was Prince Calix. However, he had to take the credit, as the truth of Calix's involvement could not come to light. Gale showed he was aware of the situation, knowing that Gerard had once been the Viscount's advisor, and supposed that Antonio and Selvios must be regrouping. Gerard, however, warned the prince not to underestimate them, for despite the foiled plot, they were still capable of achieving their goals. Gale acknowledged the truth. After all, the engagement between Antonio's daughter and his half-brother had not been annulled, and the king's will in royal marriages is absolute. Still, Gale didn't seem concerned. Gerard then warned him that the enemy would likely try to eliminate the king after the wedding, which would make Gale himself a potential target. He tried to soften the warning, saying he didn't want to worry him, as Gale had already escaped the darkness and become the sun itself, advising him to strengthen his bonds with his allies. However, Gale got carried away by the vanity of the comparison, ignoring the rest of the advice. Instead, he declared his desire to add the Shikan territory to his faction. Gerard agreed it wasn't a bad idea, since the prince had personally read Russell's letter, a fact that could be used to his advantage. He warned, however, that it was not wise to offer them too many advantages. After all, you don't feed a fish that's already been caught. Gale mentioned that, having received the letter from Gerard's hands, he had assumed Gerard had a good relationship with the Shikan family. Gerard clarified that it was a misunderstanding, stating that his help was merely a way of settling an old debt. Looking into Gale's eyes, however, Gerard noticed a strange resemblance to Calyx, feeling as if someone were peering into the depths of his soul. Ignoring the sensation, Gale announced he would leave for the Shikan territory immediately and ordered Gerard to prepare a declaration of support. He claimed not to care about a possible rejection, as the trip alone would be enough for his adversaries to speculate on his motives, sowing confusion. Gerard, who had planned to increase his influence over the prince, now wondered why Gale showed so much interest in the Shikan territory. In any case, he couldn't stop him, leaving him with no choice but to wish him a safe journey. A few days later in the Shikan territory, Russell found Prince Calyx and got straight to the point. "You need to become a Class 4 user as quickly as possible." Calyx replied that he wasn't worried, as he was already planning to explore a dungeon or ruins to grow stronger. Russell, however, dismissed the idea, stating that the prince didn't need to take such risks. He assured him that he had personally arranged a method for Calyx to reach Class 4 as soon as possible. With that, he grabbed the prince and dragged him to the training grounds. A short time later, the soldiers watched the scene, stunned by the brutality of the regimen imposed on the prince. Russell wasn't holding back at all, and Calyx felt every blow on his own skin. Exhausted, he thought he couldn't take any more, never imagining his end would come from training exhaustion. The next morning, Russell woke Prince Calyx for training. Desperate, Calyx protested, claiming he couldn't take it anymore. At this rate, his body would simply give out. Russell, however, questioned if he would really give up so easily, reminding him that anyone could reach Class 5 with the right dedication. He himself was living proof of that. Calyx argued back that his body couldn't handle any more injuries, especially since he wasn't using potions to recover. He needed to save money, and healing elixirs were expensive. However, Russell refuted the excuse, stating that the kingdom's finances were stable precisely because of the prince's efforts. He had rested long enough. It was time to return to his duty. Even exhausted, Calyx was forced to wield the wooden sword again. Although it was a training weapon, its blows still hurt, something the prince knew all too well. Fed up with taking a beating, he concluded that he needed to find a way out of this situation as soon as possible. It was then that a crucial memory surfaced in his mind, the image of a woman. The first prince's most powerful ally, the most skilled person in the game when it came to finance. Calyx reasoned that at this point in the story, she had not yet met the first prince. This meant that if he was fast enough, he could recruit her to his cause before Gale did. Taking advantage of a moment when he was on the ground, Calyx interrupted the training. As Russell pulled him up abruptly, he warned that he didn't want to hear any excuses, as that would only extend the training session. Ignoring the warning, Calyx got straight to the point, mentioning the silver bars they possessed but couldn't use. Russell recalled that the material had been stolen, and many were already looking for it. The prince then revealed his plan. They needed someone to launder the money, allowing them to use it without raising suspicion. Although Russell suspected this was just a ploy to escape training, he had to admit that the issue of the silver bars needed to be resolved. Still, he questioned the urgency of the matter. Calyx was insistent. If they lent out the silver, the interest alone would yield 200,000 in gold. Every day the treasure sat idle was a monumental loss. Convinced by the financial argument, Russell relented, but asked how much time would be needed. The prince replied that he would need 3 months in the capital, not a day less. Suspicious that it was just an excuse to relax, Russell agreed, but with one condition. During the trip, Kraut would be in charge of ensuring he completed his daily tasks. Calyx tried to protest, but his master's decision was final. The next day, Kraut approached with urgent news. Prince Gale was on his way to Shikan County. Surprised, Calyx questioned the reason for the sudden visit. Kraut explained he had heard that a large-scale succession battle had begun between the 1st and 5th princes, and apparently, Gale was interested in taking the Shikan territory for himself. The news came as a shock to Calyx, who had not been informed. Without hesitation, he ordered his departure to be prepared within 2 hours. Kraut argued that the fastest way would be by horse, and the prince still didn't know how to ride. Calyx, however, was determined, stating that he would learn on the go. Intrigued, Kraut asked why his master wanted to leave before Prince Gale's arrival. Calyx simply said he had his reasons. In his thoughts, he knew that of everyone who had played Heroes of Destiny, there wasn't a single person who didn't know the name Gale Roche Leclevo Krakow. Gale was one of the rare hero-level characters in the game, notorious for his talented allies. The prince knew all too well how he recruited them, by force. Those who opposed him were eliminated in mysterious ways. While Kraut worried about the scolding he would receive if the prince left without notice, the 2 hours passed. No amount of pleading could change Calyx's mind. In fact, he already felt he was running late. Looking to his side, however, an unexpected sight surprised him. Lila was also preparing to travel. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Thanks to you, Prince, the power of the shadows has been reduced. My pursuers no longer have time to bother with me," she explained. "And where do you plan to go?" Lila shrugged. "I haven't decided yet. I've always dreamed of freedom, but now that I have it, I don't know what to do with it. I suppose I'll go wherever my heart takes me." The prince, however, interrupted her, a plan already forming in his mind. "In that case, I have a suggestion for you." The prince mentioned that if the opportunity arose, he would travel to the Holy Empire of Granada. Intrigued, Lila questioned if there were artifacts or manipulation techniques suitable for women in that place. He understood her suspicion, but to his surprise, Lila stated that she trusted his words and thanked him for the valuable information, expressing her wish to meet him again someday. Although the prince agreed verbally, in his thoughts, he decreed that a reunion would never happen. To him, there was no reason. Lila didn't possess a high-level talent, and he had already extracted everything he needed from her. This was a final goodbye. However, even aware of his own calculating intentions, he chose to let her keep her hope alive. As cold as he tried to be, a part of him also wished that fate would bring them together again. After their farewell, the prince went to a cemetery to visit the grave of Albu, the soldier who had sacrificed his own life to save him. Standing before the headstone, he reflected that Albu had died more honorably than anyone else, but the feeling of guilt consumed him. He had treated the soldier with the same calculating coldness he had just shown Lila. It was then that the realization hit him. He was treating the people around him like mere game characters, and this awareness troubled him deeply. He made a silent promise. The next time he met Lila, he would act more humanely, seeing her as a person and not as a pawn on his board. Leaving a flower on the grave, he departed. Upon rejoining his army, the prince declared that he was ready to leave. 3 days later, on the border of the Shikan territory, Prince Gale and his entourage were spotted. Russell was tasked with receiving them, and that same night, a lavish banquet was held in the visitors' honor. Gale thanked them for the warm reception but didn't fail to express his regret over the absence of the heir to the throne. Russell apologized, explaining that Gale's messenger had arrived days after Prince Calyx had already left. Despite the explanation, Gale felt uneasy with the vague answers about Calyx's whereabouts. Although his curiosity was sincere, he avoided being insistent, leaving him only to lament the heir's absence. So as not to be misunderstood, Gale quickly added that he was simply eager to meet Prince Calyx, but that in any case, he was happy for the opportunity to meet Russell. After the exchange of pleasantries, Prince Gale got straight to the point. "Viscount Castellan believes we are allies," Gale explained, "and I would like to use that perception to our advantage. As proof of my good faith, I personally delivered your lordship's letter to the king." Russell thanked the prince for his gesture. The conversation then shifted. "How do you know Gerard?" Gale inquired. Russell returned the question. "Didn't he tell you?" "He only mentioned it vaguely. I'd prefer to hear your version of the events," Gale replied. Indignation welled up inside him. How dare that man treat him as if he weren't aware of his own subordinates' reports? What irritated him most, however, was his complete inability to decipher Russell's true intentions. Russell began his explanation. "Prince Calyx was ill when he received the royal summons, which forced us to send a message. Unfortunately, it was not delivered as it should have been." "Was there a problem with the messenger on the official road?" Gale questioned. "We discovered that the messenger's horse stumbled, and he ended up breaking his ankle. It was in the midst of this situation that Gerard appeared with an offer. He asked for our help to escape from Servio. In exchange, he promised to forgive the entire debt the Shikan territory owes him, and also to ensure our message reached the capital," Russell concluded. "I didn't imagine things would take such a turn, but it was imperative that the letter reached its destination." By the end of the story, Gale found nothing unusual. He knew Russell was a respected knight, but he had hoped to discover some hidden, exceptional talent. From what he heard, however, the encounter with Gerard had been a mere coincidence, a convenient exchange of favors. Furthermore, everything indicated that Calyx was a weak prince, someone he wouldn't need to worry about. With this scenario in mind, Gale presumed it wouldn't be difficult to obtain what he had come for. "In that case, Viscount Russell, can I count on the support of the Shikan territory?" The question hung in the air as Russell carefully pondered his answer. On behalf of the Shikan family, Russell declares his formal support for Prince Gale, but adds that he has a request to make. Such audacity surprises the prince. In a flashback, it is revealed that before the trip, Calix had warned Russell about Gale's intentions. The young prince explained that supporting Prince Ciel was unfeasible, as Marquis Antonio is his stepfather and guardian. On the other hand, supporting the first prince without any guarantees would bring few benefits. The only logical choice was to support Gale, but Calix had instructed Russell to take a firm stance, demanding something in return for the alliance. Calix's demand was specific, to request from the prince an exemption from the transit tax for merchant guilds that would operate in the Shikan territory. Russell pointed out that, at the moment, there were no guilds in his lands, but Calix had already foreseen this, stating that the situation would not remain that way forever. Calix knew the kingdom was divided into two major factions. Even though he was the first prince, Gale's influence did not extend to the territories of the fifth prince's faction. However, the exemption would be valid in the regions under his control, which was sufficient. As for the terms, Calix planned to limit the transit to 1,000 magical artifacts per year, a proposal that Gale, despite some resistance, would eventually accept. Russell questioned the effectiveness of the measure, arguing that other territorial taxes would still apply. In response, Calix simply asked his ally to trust him. Although he didn't fully understand the strategy, Russell decided to obey, as his master always surprised him with ingenious plans. Back in the present, Gale inquires what the Viscount's proposal might be. At that moment, Russell realizes that everything was unfolding exactly as his master had predicted. The next day, Calix and his entourage continued their journey. The prince, exhausted, could barely hold himself in the saddle. Kraut tried to cheer him up, informing him that they were only an hour away from Poznu and attributing the young man's fatigue to his lack of riding practice. In his thoughts, the guard understood his master's grumbling. After all, he was only 12 years old, a delicate age. Changing the subject, Kraut questioned the sudden change of route. The original plan was to head to the capital, so why the detour to Poznu? Calix explained it was to avoid an encounter with Gale. Kraut, intrigued, asked why he feared his brother so much. Annoyed, Calix denied being afraid, stating that the visit to Poznu was already planned for the return trip, and that he had simply decided to move it up. Kraut found his prince's reaction adorable, even when he was worked up. However, Calix knew that if he continued to be treated like a child, he would never be taken seriously. He needed to reach Class 4, but training with Russell would take an eternity. That was the real reason for his visit to Poznu. His goal was to conquer the dungeon near the city, a feat that could earn him a coveted S-rank skill. Dungeons of that caliber were rare, and his fragile constitution made the mission even more challenging, which was why he had assembled a team. Anyone who saw them could ruin his plans, but Poznu was a free city, with no meddling nobles, and where it would be easy to recruit mercenaries to complete the expedition party. Shortly after, the walls of Poznu appeared on the horizon. Upon arriving at the entrance, the group was approached by a guard, who requested that the prince fill out the visitor's log before proceeding. Once settled in an inn, Calix gathered his men. Praising everyone's excellent work during the long journey, he declared they deserved a good rest before continuing. With a smile, he asked if anyone knew a good place in the city to celebrate. The suggestion was met with great enthusiasm by the soldiers. Kraut, on the other hand, showed some apprehension, but his concern was quickly drowned out by the contagious excitement of the majority. The group headed to a bustling square, filled with stalls offering quality food and drink. In the midst of the crowd, they were approached by a boy who invited them to his tavern, guaranteeing it was the best place to drink in all of Poznu. Intrigued, Calix accepted the invitation. At the establishment, the prince ordered a round of drinks for everyone. Kraut, however, was the only one who refused to drink, which earned him some curious looks from his companions. He justified himself by explaining that someone needed to remain sober and alert to ensure the prince's safety. As the others celebrated, Calix approached the boy who had invited them, telling him he had something important to discuss. The boy watched the commotion, perplexed, until Calix approached and asked about a quieter establishment. The youth warned he would get in trouble for taking him elsewhere, but Calix explained that his soldiers were enjoying themselves, and he didn't want to spoil their fun. He then promised a generous reward if the boy would guide him to a more peaceful spot. At the sight of the gold coin, the boy's eyes lit up. He agreed to accompany Calix on the sole condition that no drunkards came with them. The prince agreed and called for only Kraut to follow. As they left the tavern, the boy pointed the way. Along the route, Calix asked how long he had lived in Poznu. The youth replied that he had lived in the city for over 10 years, which surprised the prince, who remarked that he looked much younger. Annoyed, the boy retorted that he was 14, forcing Calix to apologize. Changing the subject, the prince wanted to know who the most powerful person in the city was. The guide explained that the most renowned fighter was Lord Omar, leader of the Steel Shield mercenary group. However, he mused that, in reality, Omar had never faced the other great leaders, so it was impossible to determine the strongest among them. Curious, Calyx asked who the others were. Astonished by the foreigner's ignorance, the boy listed the Red Wolf, Black Wing, and Steel Shield groups, known as the three great mercenary groups. Calyx then asked about the monster wave from last autumn. The youth answered that, judging by the number of people in the tavern, the damage wasn't severe, but the adults were worried about the possible arrival of a supermoon soon. With an air of superiority, Calyx commented that adults worried too much and that the boy, like him, was mature for his age. Finally, they arrived at their destination, a place the boy indicated as good lodging. However, when they knocked on the door, a housekeeper informed them that they didn't receive anyone without a reservation and asked what they wanted. Calyx explained that the boy had guided them there. The woman then addressed the youth, calling him Urine, and asking if he had been causing trouble again. She apologized to the visitors, but reiterated that the place was closed. The housekeeper's suspicion was palpable, while Calyx in turn noticed something peculiar about her. The observant woman wondered to herself if he was staring at her ring. Annoyed by the refusal, Calyx claimed the boy hadn't guided him correctly and demanded his coin back. Urine, however, defended himself, stating he had fulfilled his part of the bargain. He declared he knew Calyx was seeking information, not women, which was why he hadn't taken him to a brothel. The housekeeper, exasperated, scolded Urine, further complicating the situation. It was then, as he studied the child before him, that Calyx had a revelation. This was not a boy, but a girl named Celestina Urine Agrippina. He hadn't realized it at first because of her clothes, but now he was sure. He had finally found who he was looking for. The shadow sorceress, Celestina Urine, although her appearance was very different from what he remembered. Calyx had traveled to this city with the sole purpose of meeting the future top-tier merchant and planned to invest in her as soon as he found her. Changing his tone, Calyx declared that if this was a place where he could get information, then he wouldn't take the money back. The housekeeper, however, ordered Urine to get away from those men. In the same instant, other armed women appeared, surrounding them. Kraut intervened, his voice deep. "Do you know who you're pointing those arrows at?" The housekeeper replied coldly that in a high-class establishment like this one, it was rare for guests to refuse to leave politely. Perceiving that they possessed combat skills and posed a threat, she had to take precautions. If they withdrew peacefully, the arrows would not be fired. Calyx, however, reprimanded her for her inflexibility, warning that if she continued to treat all visitors that way, she would never gain powerful allies. Urine tried to intervene, but to no avail. With a subtle smile, Calyx praised the housekeeper's enchanting beauty, but remarked that she was not as wise as her young mistress. The woman thought to herself that she was well aware of Urine's talent, but she needed to be cautious not to reveal their true identities. Deciding to talk, she asked who he was. "You should already know," Calyx replied, and instructed her to remove the ring and hand over the girl. Surprised, the woman asked how he knew about the ring. Calyx revealed that he recognized the royal symbol of Agrippina engraved on it, and that by wearing it, she clearly didn't want to be recognized. Upon hearing his words, the housekeeper understood that the situation had become far more serious. She now knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that the person before her was Prince Calyx. Kraut reprimanded the woman, demanding she show more respect when addressing his master. Calyx, however, intervened, reasoning that her mind must be filled with questions, which he would gladly answer if they were welcomed properly. In her thoughts, the woman knew she couldn't give in. Everyone's safety would be at risk. Besides, the only people capable of recognizing the symbol on her ring would be members of the royal family or some relentless bounty hunter. Sensing her confusion, the prince turned to the girl at his side. "What do you think, Urine? The more complex the problem, the simpler the answer," she replied serenely. "The prince is intelligent and never forgets what he sees. The royal crest appears in many history books, so he must have seen it somewhere. However, this is just the crest of a long-extinct royal family. There's nothing special about it." "Your insight is remarkable," Calyx praised. "The prince is also quite sharp," she returned. "Enough mutual praise," the housekeeper interrupted sternly, signaling to her guards. "Lower your crossbows. This place is too exposed. I invite you inside to talk." Once inside the hall, the governess gestured for her guests to sit. Calyx had managed to get inside as planned, but he admitted to himself that being in a room with that woman was far too tense. "Watch your words," the hostess warned. "I still haven't decided if I'll let you leave here alive. Convince me. For starters, you should treat me with more hospitality. How about serving some tea?" the prince suggested, unperturbed. The governess signaled for the servants to bring the drink, and it was at that moment that Calyx put the pieces together in his mind. He remembered the game Destiny of Heroes, where Urine was a member of the Children of Aridona, an obscure clandestine group. She had also been Prince Gale's most powerful ally, and no one had ever surpassed her ability to generate wealth. For that reason, Calyx intended to invest the stolen money with Urine as she understood that trust is the most valuable asset for a merchant. However, she was still very young. Perhaps it would be better to wait for her to grow up and become the Yurine he knew. Or perhaps it would be more prudent to shape her himself before Gale got to her first. Seeing the prince drink his tea so calmly, the governess questioned him. "Did you not consider the possibility that the drink might be poisoned?" "No. If it were, I would know," he replied with a confident smile. "I cannot proceed with the negotiations without a guarantee that you will keep our secret." Calyx surprised her with a direct offer, 100,000 gold coins. "But first, can you guarantee that you won't steal the money and run?" The surprise left the governess speechless. Amid the silence, Yurine spoke up. "That is too large a sum to refuse." "Yurine, you shouldn't be here," the governess scolded. "On the contrary," Yurine disagreed, standing up. "Allow me to introduce myself formally. I am a former member of the Agripatina royal family, from the Jaipur Union. Despite the title, I am merely a fugitive. Therefore, I would like to be called just Yurine." The prince was genuinely surprised. Moments before, Yurine had acted like a mere street child, but now her demeanor was completely different. On second thought, he concluded that his character and Yurine were only a year apart in age. There was no reason to hold back. Becoming a princess doesn't guarantee the ability to make money. If you want to do business, you'll have to explain your method better. "I have a network of fugitives," Yurine explained. "This means I obtain information quickly. The basics of business are to buy low and sell high. You're trying to enter the kingdom's distribution business, but the competition is intense," Calyx countered. "Besides, there's no guarantee your rivals will play fair. They have powerful backers and can block your goods at customs or find justifications to confiscate your products. Every business has its risks, and my organization should not be underestimated. I can handle smuggling if necessary. Everything needs to be legalized to work," the prince insisted. "The goal of this venture is to use it legitimately. In that case, I understand you're trying to launder stolen goods. It's just compensation for emotional damages," Calyx defended, though he knew he wouldn't convince her. "In any case, the important thing is that you guarantee you won't run off with the money." Yurine faced him, and a simple solution formed on her lips. "That's quite simple. The prince just has to take me as a hostage." The governess vehemently opposed the idea, but Yurine argued that 10 years had passed since her people began to wander in foreign lands. She stated that if the situation persisted, the organization would either collapse or be reduced to a mere criminal group. With the sum of 100,000 gold coins, she was willing to risk everything to reclaim her position and ensure the integrity of her people. The young woman's words moved the governess, but Calyx interrupted the moment, declaring he had no interest in their drama. The prince's attitude irritated the woman, but he continued indifferent, stating he didn't care about their past. However, he pointed out that if Yurine wished to be treated as a princess, she should return to the kingdom of the Jaipur Union. Despite her guardian's visible discontent, Yurine admitted the prince was right. In a gesture of renunciation, she declared she would abandon the Agripatina name and then cut her own hair, surprising everyone in the room. Even with the drastic act, Yurine acknowledged that the prince's decisions were not reckless. Calyx confirmed, explaining that his original plan was to leave everything in her hands. However, he stated that Yurine was still too young for him to trust her completely. Until a solid bond of trust was established, he would have to guide her personally. In turn, Yurine observed that the prince didn't seem much older and asked his age. He pondered that, despite the girl's maturity, he couldn't treat her as an adult, as she was still just a child. Calyx clarified that his role was only to provide the capital, while Yurine would operate the business with his money. Therefore, the age difference between them was irrelevant. Yurine understood, but asked to know the prince's plan in detail. Calyx replied that, first of all, they needed to focus on the main objective, and for that, he required more information. Complying with the request, Yurine ordered the governess to reveal everything they had to the prince, especially the data on the 3 factions that controlled Posnu. The prince noticed how the governess, who just moments ago had acted like a protective mother, instantly changed her demeanor upon receiving an order, showing a clear separation between her public and private life. A short time later, the governess led Calyx to the information room, assuring him that everything he needed was there. With that, he was ready to set his plan in motion. Calyx spent a sleepless night, immersed in studying the documents. By morning, his only concern was locating the dungeon he was looking for. He had 2 options: explore the dungeon with the elite members accompanying him, or hire local mercenaries, running the risk of leaking crucial information. Even if he chose to work only with his group, it would be essential to hire at least 1 mage. The presence of a mage in a tactical team multiplied its strength exponentially, which justified the high cost of their services. To his surprise, the prince discovered that a 6th-class mage resided in Posnu, so he decided to learn more about him. When he looked for Yurine, the housekeeper informed him that the young lady was in class. One of the maids offered to prepare some tea while he waited. As the tea was served, Calyx pondered. A sixth-class mage was a power on par with Russell. His territory, Shaiken, had been nothing more than a mere barony until the previous generation. His father, Colin, had reached the 7th class at a young age, but passed away soon after becoming a count, before he could even solidify the territory's foundations. Calix considered that he was not yet the official heir, and wondered if such a powerful mage would join him. In any case, he would only know the answer if he tried. Just then, Urine appeared. "What does the prince need?" she asked, her excitement obvious. "What's our next step?" Calix, however, tempered her excitement, explaining that they needed to make proper preparations before launching the business he had planned, a process that could take anywhere from 6 months to a year. He advised her not to get too excited. To start, he handed her a balance certificate issued by the Mage's Tower, which certified a deposit of 30,000 gold coins. Urine recognized the document's authenticity, but found the amount strange, as they had agreed on a total sum of 100,000. Even so, she smiled, saying that amount would be enough to start helping her big bro. The prince was startled to be called that. "Anyone who invests that kind of amount in me automatically becomes my big bro," Urine explained, a twinkle in her eye. "That's how I'll be treating you from now on." Changing the subject, "Why did you call for me earlier?" The prince, in turn, got straight to the point. "Do you know someone named Edilun Beltua?" Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the housekeeper, who informed them that the mage Edilun Beltua had been detained, suspected of practicing dark magic. Urine promptly defended the mage, stating that the suspicions were unfounded. The housekeeper, though she agreed, warned of the importance of avoiding unnecessary entanglements. According to her, in this world, an act of kindness might be repaid not with gratitude, but with absurd demands. Upon hearing the report, Calix recalled Edilun Beltua. He knew the mage had a difficult personality, but wasn't a bad person. Determined, the prince informed the housekeeper of his desire to speak with the mage, assuring her he would take full responsibility for his actions. The housekeeper initially refused to cooperate. However, faced with Calix's insistence, she relented. The woman revealed that outside the city's north gate, facing the mountains, there was a community cemetery. There, in an isolated cabin, resided Edilun Beltua, who also worked as an undertaker. She added that the mage was a stubborn man who, since his arrival, had immersed himself in his experiments and rarely left the place. Calix asked if the housekeeper knew anything about these experiments, but she merely commented that mages hate having their research secrets exposed. Startled, Urine intervened. "Are you really going to his cabin?" "Yes. I noticed you don't like it when people speak ill of the mage, so what's the problem with visiting him?" The young woman explained that simply being near Edilun seemed to drain her energy and begged the prince not to give in to any temptation, no matter how attractive the offer. Calix confirmed he understood, but he could tell Urine was hiding something. Before he could question her, the housekeeper announced the end of the break and led her back to her class. Determined, the prince set off to pay the mage a visit. Accompanied by Kraut, Calix arrived at the cabin in the cemetery. When they knocked, a voice from inside invited them in, saying the door was unlocked. The prince reflected that few would be so calm living outside the city gates, a region infested with monsters and bandits. Whoever this was, they were extremely confident. As he crossed the threshold, Calix was enveloped by a dense aura, one befitting a dark mage. Although he already knew of his reputation, Edilun's presence in person was something else entirely. The prince introduced himself formally, but the mage feigned ignorance of the outside world, stating that a mere name didn't tell him if he was standing before someone important. "I do not come from a famous family, and my titles are irrelevant," Calix replied. "And regardless of my station, it cannot compare to that of someone who has reached the level of Archmage." "You talk too much," Edilun cut in, impatient. "I have no time for games. Get to the point. I have work to do." Calix laid out his plan. He intended to conquer a nearby dungeon and wished to hire the services of Edilun Beltua. "Are you referring to the dungeon in the Impalan mountain range?" the mage questioned. Upon confirmation, Edilun let out a dry laugh. "It's been a while since I've encountered such an audacious fool." The insult to his master irritated Kraut, but Calix ignored him and pressed on with the proposal, guaranteeing payment. "Money is only valuable if you survive to spend it," Edilun retorted. "If you value your life at all, boy, go home before you get hurt." Not one to give up, the prince tried another approach, offering to find any rare item the mage might need for his research. The suggestion infuriated Edilun. "Were you sent by the mage's tower to investigate my research?" he snarled. Calix realized he had touched a nerve. "Out of my house, now." Frustrated, Calix returned to the mansion. Urine approached him, asking if the price the mage demanded was too high. "He wouldn't even negotiate," the prince replied, before asking her directly, "What happened between you and Edilun in the past?" She revealed that shortly after the mage settled in the region, she invested a sum in his research, but he never paid her back. "Did you make a loan contract?" Calyx asked. Yurine confirmed and showed him the document. Upon reading it, the prince saw that the amount was 30 gold coins. He stared at her, incredulous. How can you be so calm after being swindled like that? Yurine grew irritated by the provocation. However, the protagonist says he can resolve the situation. The girl refuses, claiming she'll make the old man work to pay back every last cent he owes. Calyx explains that this might work with an ordinary person, but the old man she's referring to is a 6th-class mage. Yurine then understands that, according to the prince, she won't be getting her money back. The protagonist clarifies that she didn't lend him money, but invested it for a share of the profits, and in doing so, she accepted the risk of losing it. He adds that if she were strong enough to demand payment, she might get her money back, but he knows she isn't capable of it. However, Yurine retorts that the prince isn't any stronger than the mage either, as she saw him training earlier and found his performance pathetic. Now, it's the protagonist who falls for the taunt and gets flustered. However, he reflects that he shouldn't get annoyed by the words of a mere child. Despite being a genius, Yurine is still inexperienced, and the fact that she thinks a contract can control a 6th-class mage proves it. In any case, he states that a good merchant must accept the loss when an investment fails and, moreover, must know how to seize any opportunity to recover what they can. If Yurine went to the trouble of drafting a contract, then she must have at least recorded the topic the mage was researching. After all, you don't invest money in something without knowing what it is. So he says he can help her, offering to pay 50 gold coins in exchange for a 67% annual return. Yurine accepts, but on the condition that she gets to see everything up close. Finally, they strike a deal. Afterward, Yurine takes the protagonist to the information room and hands him everything she has on the matter. The governess passes by and asks Yurine what she is doing. Startled, the girl explains what happened. Harry becomes furious upon hearing the story and scolds Yurine for making a deal behind her back. Yurine justifies herself, saying that her governess always finds an excuse to prevent her from closing her deals. In turn, Harry drags the girl away, warning her that today's supplementary lesson will be a very long one. Calyx is left alone with Kraut in the research room, giving them time to study the material. But after spending some time on it, the protagonist realizes that convincing the mage won't be easy, and concludes he'll have to enter the dungeon first and ask questions later. He wakes Kraut and tells him they are leaving. Kraut asks where, exactly, his master intends to go. The prince replies that he is going to hire mercenaries. A while later, they go into the city and arrive at the mercenary brokerage. The presence of a nobleman inside draws attention. Aware of this, the prince announces that he wishes to hire mercenaries. The person in charge is so startled that he can barely attend to him and asks for a moment, saying he needs to go somewhere. Minutes later, another man approaches. The protagonist quickly notices that this is no ordinary man. He had heard that 4th class or higher mercenaries are quite rare. The head of the establishment explains that when a fighter reaches a certain skill level, they can even live like a knight if they find the right rural area. Kraut wonders if that was an indirect jab at him. In any case, the man continues, saying that many prefer freedom and choose to stay. Furthermore, he expresses surprise that a nobleman is present in person instead of sending a representative. The prince replies that sending a representative wouldn't guarantee a proper contract. Upon hearing this, the man in charge thinks that the boy before him is young enough to be his grandson, yet as cunning as an old fox. Once in the negotiation room, he asked what exactly the prince needed. Calyx explained that the mission could last up to 3 months, but he would pay an above-average rate for it. He also said he needed, at most, 200 people, and that the group's commander must be an S-rank mercenary. This made the mercenary guild leader realize that, despite facing a child, the boy should not be underestimated. The guild leader noticed that the boy had hidden crucial details of the request, while at the same time presenting the conditions clearly and directly. Furthermore, everything was described in a perfectly balanced manner. He thought it would be strange to accept so easily, yet ashamed to refuse outright. So, he said that finding a group of mercenaries who would accept these conditions would require some effort and that he needed more details. The prince replied that to reveal the operation's details, the guild master would have to be willing to accept a smaller reward. Calyx thought that no matter how much the man insisted, he wouldn't be able to get any information out of him. His conclusion proved correct, as the guild leader accepted the initial conditions without complaint. He added that he had never met a noble like the prince before, and only asked him to do his best to bring as many mercenaries home safely as possible. The prince promised to do his best. Upon closing the deal, the mercenary leader said he would send a captain to the prince's inn when everything was ready, and after that, they could discuss the operation's details. A while later, Kraut noticed the prince was nervous and asked if everything was all right. Calyx replied that he thought they wouldn't accept his proposal easily, but he was relieved proved that everything had worked out. Kraut asked where he had learned to negotiate so well. Unable to tell the truth, Calyx made up an excuse and invited his ally for a drink. Kraut replied that the prince wasn't old enough for that, but perhaps they could have some juice instead. Meanwhile, a mysterious person was observing a noble accompanied by a bodyguard leaving the mercenary agency. Finding the scene quite unusual, they decided it would be best to investigate the matter further. Pozniev is the only free city in the kingdom of Roke and is not affected by the rules of the nobility. The city is famous as a sanctuary for mercenaries. The moment someone joins the mercenaries of Pozniev, all their records are erased, regardless of their past. In return, any affiliated mercenary in the city is required to fight in the wave of monsters that overflows from Impalin Mountain every year. The monsters always appear in autumn in large numbers. In the end, they are either defeated by the mercenaries or they feast upon their fallen hunters. However, this burden did not always fall upon the mercenaries. The first line of defense used to be a battalion of prisoners, composed entirely of criminals. Since their deaths meant no compensation would be paid to their families, Pozniev's current system was built on this foundation. Over time, they transformed into the Blackwing mercenary group, and as the years passed, came to control both the city's entertainment district and its criminal underworld. The city's underworld boss is named Walter, the leader of the Blackwing mercenaries. In his home, he was visited by Corvus, the hooded man from before, and asked how he dared to show his face there. Corvus replied that, considering what happened in the past, he was the one who should be angry. But as a dark knight, he had set aside his past and asked Walter to remain calm for once in his life. To Walter, however, these words were an insult. Furthermore, he knew very well that Corvus had been taking high-level requests despite being a dark knight, and wondered how a piece of trash like Corvus managed to reach Class 6. Getting straight to the point, Corvus said that a group of nobles had arrived in the city a few days ago and asked what Walter knew about it. Walter replied that he had no information. In response, Corvus claimed that the nobles had apparently just posted a request at the Mercenary Guild and asked Walter to find out everything he could on the matter. In turn, Walter asked what was in it for him. Corvus said he would pay for the service up front and give a bonus if the collected information was good, but he needed it done as soon as possible. Otherwise, he claimed Walter would miss out on a great opportunity if he didn't accept. Even though he didn't like the idea, Walter ordered one of his men to bring him all the information he could find on the matter. A while later, the documents were ready, but upon seeing the contents, Walter was surprised and asked if that noble was trying to start a war. Corvus replied that they hadn't declared a territorial dispute and didn't share any borders with enemy nations. Despite this, Walter retorted that it was a level A mission. Dungeons were supposed to be handled by small, elite teams, not 200 mercenaries. At this, Corvus agreed that no one would be stupid enough to hire so many people for a simple dungeon. Walter thought the same and suggested they should just exterminate the nobles. Noticing the confusion, Trias asks if the prince has a favorite hostess. At this, the protagonist thinks that there's no need to introduce Harry after all, and understands that in a way, Trias likes her. So, he says he was just looking for a quiet place, away from prying eyes, and happened to meet a girl who introduced him to this place. With that, Trias concludes that the prince has no ulterior motives with Madame Harry. Changing the subject, he asks if the prince is considering hiring more mercenaries. As far as he knows, there are only two types of rank A missions: cannon fodder for an unwinnable battle or a dungeon expedition. The prince thinks that Trias has realized he isn't preparing for a war, but at the same time, he must not know anything about the dungeon exploration plan. The man seems to know nothing about the scale or rank of the mission, and yet he wants to suggest hiring more people. In other words, the protagonist understands that monsters won't be his only concern, as there will also be looters after the spoils. Trias says the prince shouldn't underestimate the danger. Although it would cost more to hire others, it would be worth it, because if their contingent is far superior, the enemies won't dare to attack so easily. However, the protagonist refuses to hire more mercenaries, stating that their adversaries won't be from any of the three great powers. Trias realizes the prince isn't taking the situation seriously, and believes that mere mercenaries won't stop a noble from being attacked. If he were more insistent, the contract might be cancelled, so he thinks it's best to leave it as it is. But if the situation worsens, he plans to escape with Harry and Urine. With that, he decides to review the contract details. The newly added request indicates he needs to gather a third more people, in addition to the requested materials. Furthermore, he understands that to maintain secrecy, each individual will be responsible for only one task. Therefore, he will begin preparations for the mission. 3 days later, in an open field on the outskirts of the city, Trias reports that, as per his instructions, a total of 260 people have been gathered. In his thoughts, the prince believes that despite being so dramatic, Trias did a good job. But before proceeding, he wants to do something. The protagonist begins to select the members who will be left out of the mission. As he does this, Trias warns him, saying that mercenaries are more persistent than expected. The prince then tells Trias to keep an eye on those who resist, as some of them are likely spies. Trias asks how the prince can be so sure. He replies that real mercenaries would be happy to get paid without having to risk their lives. After all, they received half the payment up front. On the other hand, if a spy received money from another source, they would have to return the payment if they came back without completing the mission. That's why they would refuse to leave. Despite his logical approach, the protagonist thinks it's impossible to know for sure who is a spy and who isn't. But in a way, he has considerably reduced the risk of information leaks. Now, he is truly ready to depart. Amidst this, Yurine approaches and asks if the prince liked her gift. The protagonist thinks that if it weren't for her, he would have never realized one of the three great powers wanted him dead. The girl says they work together, and that she can't leave an important ally in danger. Thanks to Yurine's personal connections, the protagonist gained a great shield in the form of Trias, who was brought in by the governess. Yurine says the monsters in the Impalin mountain range are as fierce as those in the Golda Mountains. Kalix says he doesn't fear that. Yurine in turn asks how a spoiled boy raised in a mansion can feel no fear of danger. The prince replies that he often faces danger in his dreams. During the journey, Trias asks if the prince truly intends to keep their final destination a secret until the very end. He argues that the area is a tangle of different monster territories, and they can't just march aimlessly. For that reason, he would like to at least send scouts ahead. Despite his insistence, Kraut says that he trusts his master, and that Trias should do the same. Trias has seen many mercenaries perish because of the stubbornness of nobles, so he fears the same will happen now. Furthermore, he imagines that if their losses are too great, they will have to retreat, and all the resources invested in the mission will be wasted. In response, the prince asks Kraut to climb a tall tree and observe the surroundings. After doing so, Kraut reports a goblin village about 500 meters away and asks what he should do. The prince orders the goblins to be wiped off the map. However, Kraut points out that the smell of blood might attract larger monsters. Even so, the prince says that a good knight never runs from a fight. Startled, Trias wonders how Kraut managed to spot a goblin village from 500 meters away. As if that weren't enough, Kraut adds that on the other side of the path, there is an orc settlement with about 10 huts. The prince says that's not very many and that he doesn't want any to escape. Kraut also reports that further out, about 650 meters away, there is a knoll settlement. The prince orders them to be eliminated as well. Trias, shocked by Kraut's perception, doesn't understand why the prince wants to attack all of them at once, instead of simply bypassing them.